Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome to Let's Start Story on What If Naruto Married with Harem Queen Kozuki Hiyori. So do 4 blue hearts. Comment, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video, and please share with your friends and watch till end. Also check out Patreon for I have upload Harry x Hermione uncensored spicy version, link in description, that had been reduced to rubble in seconds, and the stench of the deaths of hundreds mixed nauseatingly. Panting heavily as the last remnants of his sage mode power left him, Uzumaki Naruto silent. TLY surveyed the wasteland that had once been his home, the shinobi village hidden in the leaves, Konohagakure. Behind him lay the charred and mangled remains of 5 of the bodies of his most fearsome enemy to date. One Nagato of Omegakure, more commonly known as the shinobi terrorist Pain. This Pain was the leader of the infamous Akatsuki, an organization that had once featured 9 members, all S-class terrorists and criminals themselves, and had guided them in their hunt for the various Jinchuriki and Biju that were scattered across the land. For nearly 5 years the Akatsuki had hunted Naruto, seeking the power of the legendary nine-tailed fox. During that time, most of the Akatsuki had perished at the hands of various Konoha shinobi, and Pain had finally decided to take matters into his own hands. A few hours previously, in a brutal, shock and awe display of power, Pain had launched an assault on Konoha personally, and with a single attack had decimated a massive portion of the village. In less than 5 minutes, Pain had not only killed thousands of people, but had also blasted most of the village into a crater, and the effort had barely seemed to faze him. Shortly before Naruto returned from a crucial training expedition where he had learned to enter the near-legendary Sage Mode, the remaining villagers had rallied together to try to repel Pain's assault. Most of them did not survive the attempt, and their deaths weighed heavily on Naruto's conscience. Naruto struggled to catch his breath, exhaustion was settling in. He only had one more clone secretly gathering nature chakra, but he couldn't use it just yet. So instead, he glared defiantly at his tormentor, the destroyer of Konoha. Pain was a monster of a man that possessed the legendary Rinnegan, and had learned to impose his will on corpses, granting them a sort of false life. For nearly a full hour, Naruto had waged battle with Pain and his corpse puppets, and through a combination of luck, skill, rapo, and overwhelming talent and determination, had finally managed to put down all but one of his opponent's bodies. This path of Pain, as the puppets referred to themselves, was made from a man with medium-length spiky orange hair, sporting several facial piercings, including a metal bar through each ear, 3 studs through the side of his upper nose, and 1 spike stud on each end of the bottom lip. What was especially disconcerting about this last path was that it was completely unscathed. There wasn't even a rip in the black and red Akatsuki cloak it wore. Taking a single moment to check, to make sure the other bodies were still non-responsive, Naruto's gaze refocused on his last opponent as he got ready to re-enter Sage Mode. This is it, he told himself, you can beat him, and make him pay for everything he's done. Miles away from Konoha, a clone of Naruto was meditating under a small waterfall, sitting preternaturally still. Finally, it sensed the mental command of the original Naruto, and as it dispelled itself, power rushed into Naruto's real body. His sapphire eyes instantly changed to a burning gold, and the fatigue that had been weighing him down vanished. You're very strong, Pain spoke suddenly, his purplish eyes boring straight into Naruto's own. No one has ever given Pain this much trouble before. He raised his right hand while a black spike materialized in his left, but you won't win. And I have grown tired of this charade. His chakra flared in a split second, Bansho Tenon. An overwhelming force took hold of Naruto with crushing power. What? He barely managed to yell, as he was pulled off his feet. The technique was new to him and unfortunately, he wasn't able to figure out what was happening fast enough. The blonde ninja, caught fully off guard, was helpless as Pain's technique took effect. Before he could even blink, Naruto found himself staring literally eye to eye with the expressionless body of Pain. Goodbye Uzumaki Naruto, with your death the Kyuubi will be set free. And its power and the world will be mine, Pain remarked flatly. Take comfort in knowing that your death will usher in a new, perfect world. It wasn't until Pain moved his hand lower that Naruto finally realized the black spike was now lodged indirectly into his heart. Then as he struggled to move at all, Pain placed his left hand on the center of Naruto's chest and whispered, Shinra Tensei. There was a violent surge of chakra and Naruto was blasted completely out of the crater that was once Konoha. As darkness began creeping into his vision, he distinctly remembered someone, perhaps himself, screaming, "No!" And then there was nothing, only silence. Later, somewhere outside Konoha. With a start, Naruto opened his eyes, wincing slightly as they readjusted to the light. What the hell just happened? He muttered softly, a little dazed. As he turned his head to the side, he noted the large trees in the surroundings. I'm outside the village, he mused to himself, his thoughts felt sluggish. He paused for a moment as the thought finally registered properly. The village, he shouted, jumping to his feet. I have to get back. He tried to charge his chakra to his legs. And just as he was about to jump away, he felt a sudden sharp tug on his chest and stomach. Looking down, he was surprised to discover two chains on his torso trailing off a ways into the distance. One of the chains was sticking out from directly between his pectorals, however, the other chain was located directly on the seal. Instantly his blood ran cold at the sight of the second thick chain. Fighting off the surge of panic, noting that there was no immediate danger, he took a breath. What the hell? He bellowed out loud, why the hell are there chains stuck in me? And his voice rang softly through the trees. When no one answered, his face fell. He looked closer at the chains, and what he saw defied logic. The chains literally protruded from inside his body, with no visible anchor. It was impossible to say the least, but there it was. Tearing his eyes away from the peculiarity, Naruto focused on his priorities, which was mainly getting back to Konoha. Might as well see where they led. He mumbled as he began following the chains, wrapping the excess around his hand, absently noting that they were ice cold despite it being a hot summer day. Somehow, instinctively, he knew that he couldn't remove the chains himself, so he made sure not to tug too hard. When the chains grew taut, he found himself standing in front of a large tree with the chains going behind it. Fearing that he had been somehow chained to a tree while unconscious, he crept forward. What the hell is this? He roared in anger and shock a moment later. His mind reeled, while he stumbled back, nearly falling down at the sight. There, laying on the ground in front of him, was himself. A perfect clone of his own body lay right before his eyes, with tattered clothes and new hole in the heart and all. He wasn't sure how long he stared at the body, but he knew some time passed. After a while he spoke aloud. This can't be happening, Naruto panicked. What the hell is going on? A moment later he had a realization. It's gotta be a trick, a genjutsu or something. He brought his hands together into the familiar rat hand seal, and tried to bring his chakra to bear. It was something he had done hundreds of times. With barely a channeling chakra that is, but it didn't work. He'd almost run out of chakra while training before, and he'd had his chakra sealed a few times, but the life energy had always been there. This time it was different. In that single, awful moment, Naruto came face to face with the absolute truth. He was dead. This can't be happening, this can't be me. He gasped aloud, while a horrible realization settled on him. He had failed. He had lost against the monster that was pain, and now his village, his friends, everyone he cared about would be destroyed, and it was his fault. Crushing despair settled on him and he wondered what could he do. He began to scream and curse at the injustice of it all. He was so preoccupied with the terrible scene before his eyes that he failed to notice the impossible materialization of an old-world-style, wooden sliding door, or shoji behind him, and certainly wasn't aware of the person who stepped through. Kozuki. The sight of one blonde teenager screaming to the heavens, was what Urahara Kozuki was treated to as he stepped through the Senkaimon gateway to the living world. So this is the one, mused Kiss Uke to himself as he watched Naruto rage. He's certainly lively, isn't he? After observing the other blonde for a few moments, Kozuki finally cleared his throat loudly. Naruto froze in mid-rant at the sound and whirled around. His hand instinctively reaching for his kunai, only to grasp at nothing. His blue eyes roamed over the newcomer, quickly taking his unusual appearance. The man was blonde, much like himself. But it was a paler shade and longer. He wore a pure black kimono, with a white undershirt, and a white haori cloak draped over his shoulders. He also noted the sheathed sword at the man's side and quickly tensed up. Unsure what to expect, Kozuki noted the teen's sharp look and raised his hands up in a placating manner. Easy, I'm not here to fight, he said genially. My name is Urahara Kozuki, what's yours? Uzumaki Naruto, Naruto replied warily, never taking his eyes off of the older man's face. Look, I bet you're wondering what is going on, said Kozuki gently, as he stepped forward. No shit, retorted Naruto sarcastically glaring at the newcomer. Kozuki frowned at the boy's crude statement but let it slide. I'm sorry to tell you this Naruto-kun, but I'm afraid you're dead, he said gently. He hated this type of work. He was a scientist through and was a terrible emotional therapist. If not for the unusual aspects of this particular young man's life, he wouldn't even be here. Expecting another crude outburst from the teen, Kozuki was rather surprised when Naruto merely slumped forward and sighed. I kind of figured that, guess that means I'm a ghost. The teen muttered mostly to himself before falling into silent contemplation. After a moment he looked back up at Kozuki. You know, it's funny, I always pictured death looking kinda different, he said, almost absently. I was expecting the traditional Shinigami, you know. Kozuki actually laughed at that. Most people have their own idea of what death is like, my boy, but be that as it may, I am a Shinigami, he said. Placing emphasis on a. There are more than one? Asked Naruto, genuinely surprised. Indeed, responded Kozuki, there are many Shinigami, but we are all the guides of souls. And I am here now to take you to Soul Society. Soul Society? What's that? Asked Naruto, while reflexively rubbing the back of his head, a nervous habit he'd never been able to kick. It's what you mortals refer to as the afterlife, explained Kozuki. As a Shinigami, I myself am part of a very special group within Soul Society, and I was chosen to ferry your soul for a very specific reason. Let me guess, by specific reason. You mean the Kyuubi, don't you? Naruto growled. Anger welled up in him. He was suddenly sure that yet another group was looking for him solely because of his burden. Kozuki noticed the dark look on the boy's face. Yes, he said. But not for the reason you might think. Kozuki paused for a moment, before continuing, tell me, what do you know about your seal? Naruto frowned. Not much, he admitted. Just that it's different from most other demon-containing seals, and that it's very strong. Kozuki nodded. You are correct, he said. What you probably don't know is that in order to seal away the Kyuubi in the first place, the man you know as the fourth Hokage summoned one of us, which is quite a feat for a human, you know, and struck a deal. Naruto blinked in surprise. What do you mean? He asked. How is that even possible? Kozuki huffed in annoyance. We still aren't sure exactly how the technique was made, he admitted, but somehow he did it. And he of course also wanted to make a deal, but the price for meddling in mortal affairs is often quite steep, and is usually paid for with one's own soul. Naruto shivered at the ominous statement. So what exactly did the fourth ask for? He inquired. Kozuki sighed. In exchange for his own soul he had the Nine Tails life energy split and sealed into you, and he asked that once you died, that creature be sent back to its own realm. He looked Naruto right in the eyes, as he spoke. Now that you are dead, I am here to uphold that deal. Naruto felt a small measure of relief wash over, even if he was dead. Akatsuki would not be getting the nine-tailed fox, the world would be safe from their plan at the very least. Kozuki strode past the soul of Naruto and stood over the teen's corpse. You might want to step back, the Shinigami warned. Then with a quick, clearly practiced move, Kozuki unsheathed the sword at his side and sliced straight through the chain attached to the seal, and then seamlessly jumped back a good 20 feet. There was a single moment of silence, then red chakra burst out of the sea on Naruto's corpse like a torrent of flames. Within moments the chakra began forming a gigantic fox-like form, slowly becoming more and more solid, until I am free, boomed a voice of the mighty demon fox, as it stood unfettered in the mortal plane for the first time in 15 years. Now I shall have my revenge. I'm afraid not, Kozuki spoke, interrupting the fox's tirade. Kozuki's voice was magnified somehow to be nearly deafening, and was easily picked up by the beast. In fact, you're about to leave this plane of existence entirely, he continued. Impudence, roared the fox. Who dares challenge me? The fox turned its furious gaze on the blonde Shinigami, and roared loudly. Geez, commented Kozuki idly, completely unfazed by the creature's fury. You're so very loud. I will dest. Be silent, commanded the Shinigami suddenly, his voice now echoing with power and authority. He raised his hands and spoke again. Bakudo number 63. Seijo Sabaku. From right next to the other man, Naruto watched in awe as a huge chain of bright yellow energy wrapped itself around the demon fox, completely immobilizing it. No matter what the beast tried to do free itself, nothing worked. Kozuki smiled as he finished off the technique. "That's better," he said softly, watching the beast struggle. "Now then, it is time to finish this." Focusing his spiritual energy into his legs, he took off in a massive jump and landed in midair, directly in front of the fox's eyes. He swiftly unsheathed his sword once more as he stared at the demon straight into the eye fearlessly. Then with a cold smile he said, "Goodbye," while slamming the hilt of his blade right onto the creature's face. A stunning blast of golden light appeared quickly, taking the shape of a rectangle even bigger than the fox itself. After a few seconds, the translucent rectangle seemingly pulsed once, Florida's hing brightly, and then faded away, revealing a gargantuan black doorway held shut by a massive chain, and adorned with the bandaged head and torso of a giant skeleton on each side. Naruto watched fascinated as the skeletons on the door pulled themselves open, revealing a pure blackness, a darkness that seemed to suck in light itself. An aura of dread washed over Naruto, and he instinctively moved back. One of the skeleton creatures stretched out its hand and took hold of the immobilized demon fox, and brought it, struggling vainly the entire time, straight into the blackness. The moment the fox was inside, the doors slammed shut and disappeared. A moment later, Kozuki gently floated down from the air, dropping to the ground silently. "Wah! What was that?" asked Naruto, both awestruck and terrified. What he had just seen was likely no sight not meant for mortal eyes. "The gates of hell," replied Kozuki quietly as he held his sword out perpendicular to the ground, before turning it sideways like a key. A traditional shoji materialized before the two blondes, and slid open. "Now then, it is time to go," ordered Kozuki. "But wait, there's so much I need to ask you," said Naruto. "What is Soul Society like? Is the QB really gone? Don't worry, all of your questions will be answered soon," Kozuki said with a smile as he cut the second chain. The moment the hilt of touched his forehead, the second chain, which had still been attached to Naruto's chest, vanished. At the same time, Kozuki sheathed his blade, and slid open the shoji, pausing until two black butterflies floated out of the doorway. "Come with me, Naruto. The world of the living is not your world anymore," he said somberly, before stepping through the gateway. "I promise you your questions will be answered, but it is not good for us to tarry." For a moment Naruto contemplated staying behind, but something deep inside of his soul knew that it would not be a good thing to do. So with a sigh and a shrug, he too stepped through the doorway. On the other side, Naruto found Kozuki waiting in a long dark tunnel. "Wow, there really is a tunnel with a light at the end of it," Naruto commented sardonically. Kozuki chuckled lightly, and began walking briskly towards the light, motioning for Naruto to follow. When they at last stepped into the light, Naruto suddenly felt as if a weight was lifted from his body. He felt noticeably stronger. The best he felt since he'd woken up in the woods. Looking around, he could see that he and Kozuki now stood large courtyard of sorts, but before he could even blink, a person clad in what appeared to be an old-style shinobi bodysuit appeared before them. Startled, Naruto leapt back, his own shinobi training kicking into overdrive again, as he shifted into a defensive position. "Yamamoto. Sotaicho has ordered that you appear before him immediately after you arrive," the unknown man spoke, addressing Urahara, completely ignoring Naruto. "Understood," replied Urahara in a clipped tone. "Dismissed." With a quick salute, the man disappeared as fast as he appeared. 1 second he was there, the next he was gone. "Guy's fast," Naruto murmured. "Take my hand, Naruto-kun," said Kozuki, "it's time to go see my boss." Despite his slight hesitation, Naruto obeyed and took Urahara's hand. For a second he felt nothing, but then he was pulled off his feet, whilst the details of the world blurred before his eyes. When the world appeared in focus again, Naruto let go of Kozuki's hand, his head swimming. He groaned loudly as his body and stomach protested. "God, that is worse than Shushin," he complained. "Sorry. I forgot how flash steps feel to inexperienced souls," his older companion apologized softly. After a few moments he felt better, and glancing around, Naruto noticed Hati and Urahara were in a room with 12 other people similarly dressed to Urahara. 11 of the people stood in 2 lines on facing each other, and in the center was an old man sitting in a high-backed chair. with his hands folded atop a gnarled staff. Urahara Kozuki, reporting in on a successful mission, announced Kozuki formally, addressing the old man who Naruto correctly assumed to be the leader. The Kyuubi no Yoko has been successfully returned to Hell, and its former Jinchuriki Uzumaki Naruto has been brought without incident into the Soul Society. He motioned for Naruto to step forward, who did so with slight hesitation. Even without chakra, he could sense that the old man exuded an immense aura of raw power. Uzumaki Naruto, spoke the old man, his voice gravely, his tone serious. I am Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni, Captain Commander of the 13 Divisions of Soul Society. You are here now due to the rather special circumstances surrounding your entire life, he said. Naruto nodded. Kozuki-san explained that it was a Shinigami here from Soul Society who helped seal the fox into me. Yamamoto nodded, that is correct. He cleared his throat and continued. Due to your status as a former Jinchuriki and your skills as a shinobi, we believe that you have the capacity to become a Shinigami. With your consent we would like to administer some tests to gauge your capacity. What exactly is it you Shinigami do? Questioned Naruto. He was rather curious as to what Shinigami did on a day-to-day basis. Instead of Yamamoto replying, it was Kozuki who spoke up. A Shinigami has many responsibilities, ranging from keeping the peace in Soul Society, to ferrying souls on the mortal planes along to the afterlife. Also, one of our main responsibilities is the cleansing of hollows, he said. Hollows? Asked Naruto. Something in the name and Kozuki's voice told him that hollows weren't very pleasant. Hollows are a race of creatures which are born from human souls who, for various reasons, do not cross over to Soul Society after their death. If the soul is consumed with regrets about its life, it becomes a monstrous creature that devours the souls of both living and deceased humans. Explained Kozuki. As a Shinigami, it is our responsibility to use our powers to protect the mortal world, and purify the hollows. Purify? Asked Naruto. What do you mean? He was getting tired of not knowing anything. We Shinigami use our Zanpakuto, at this Urahara gestured to the sword at his side, to kill hollows. Of course the hollow is not truly killed. Its spirit is purified of the sins it committed, and the spirit is sent to enter the Soul Society. So you use your powers to protect the living? Asked Naruto for clarification. It was also confusing. That's right, replied Urahara. Well then I would gladly become a Shinigami, proclaimed Naruto with a smile. I'd do anything to protect those who are precious to me. Excellent, boomed Yamamoto. Pleased with the youth's attitude, we need more men like him, mused the old man. Far too many saw the 13 divisions as a means to an end, a way to achieve wealth or status, and forgot their primary responsibility. Yamamoto Sautaicho, with your permission I would like to begin immediately, announced Urahara grandly. Permission granted, Yamato replied. You are dismissed, he commanded, while slamming the hilt of his staff on the ground once. Immediately, the other people who were in the hall, but who had stayed silent, vanished. Kozuki held out his hand once more. Come along Naruto-kun and we'll begin, he said with a smile. Naruto hesitated. I still have questions, he said. This is all happening so fast, and I need some answers. All right, Kozuki replied, before we do anything else I'll answer your questions. He held out his arm once more, and this time, Naruto braced himself as he took Urahara's hand. A second later the details of the world once again blurred away before his eyes. As the world slipped back into focus, Naruto absently noted that after effects of Kozuki's high-speed travel technique affected his new soul body much less the second time around. After steadying his breathing to clear away his slight dizziness, he noticed that they were standing in an office, with a large desk cluttered with unfiled papers, and with a large window facing some sort of walled-off compound, with the only visible entrance to the area being an absolutely massive door with the kanji for 12 marked inside a large black diamond. Welcome Naruto-kun to the 12th Division, Kozuki declared grandly, pointing to the compound outside the window with a flourish, and with a wide smile affixed to his face. The workplace of all 12th Division Shinigami, and the headquarters of the SRDI. The what now? Asked Naruto. What's the SRDI? It's short for Shinigami Research and Development Institute, replied Kozuki. It's a little project that I, a handsome and modest captain, have become quite proud of. We create the gadgets and devices that make our work as a Shinigami easier, plus we are in charge of monitoring for all abnormal spiritual activity in the real world. He smirked suddenly. Oh, and we conduct some unique experiments every now and again. Naruto glanced at him questioningly, but before he could speak up Kozuki pointed to a chair. Let's talk Naruto-kun, he said. What do you want to know about? Naruto took a deep breath as he sat down. Well, the first thing I want to know is, what happened to Konoha? I don't know what happened. And between pain killing me and you finding me. Kozuki nodded. I can answer that. 30 or so minutes later. As the elder blonde breezed past him, Naruto watched in surprise as Kozuki pushed open the massive doors leading to the main part of the division compound by himself, noting that for such a lanky man his physical strength was incredible. Looking around he saw that the inside of the complex consisted of 6 large stone and wood buildings, and a large garden, with a moderate-sized koi pond off to the side. Suddenly Naruto heard the sound of someone running towards them, however, before he could move into a defensive stance. A short girl with wild blonde hair pulled into 2 messy pigtails, appeared, seemingly from nowhere directly in front of him, who then proceeded to swiftly kick Kozuki square in the face, knocking the older Shinigami flat on his ass. Oi, what's the big idea, dickhead? The girl demanded roughly, while kicking the downed man in his side. How dare you go on a mission to the human world without me? She continued angrily. Oh www, that hurts, moaned Kozuki pathetically as he feebly inched away from his violent companion. What the hell, said Naruto loudly with a snort of laughter as he took in the rather comical scene. The girl whirled around to face him. For a moment she seemed honestly confused at his presence. Clearly she had been so focused on hurting Isuke that she had been wholly unaware of anything else. Then a heartbeat later the look of confusion disappeared, replaced by one of annoyance. Who are you? The girl demanded rudely. Before Naruto could respond, Kozuki, who had risen, somehow magically unscathed from the girl's assault, cut in. Hiyori-chan, this is Uzumaki Naruto. He is the one I was sent to fetch from the living realm, he said. Che. They sent a captain to ferry this weakling's soul. The girl now, identified as Hiyori, muttered as she sized him up. Why the hell would they need to do that? At the word weakling Naruto lost it. Who the hell do you think you are calling me a weakling, you little brat? He roared. Hiyori visibly twitched at his response, while Kozuki went pale. Who are you calling a little brat, you shithead? Screamed Hiyori. I'll have you know that I'm over 50 years old. Oh, so then I should call you old lady, yelled Naruto, his own temper flaring. I'm gonna crush you, shrieked Hiyori, her GHT hand reflexively reaching for the sword strapped to the back of her uniform before dropping back to her side. You can try, you little midget, shot back Naruto as he stuck his tongue out petulantly. With a scream of frustration the shorter blonde launched a powerful kick at Naruto, fully intent on giving the male teen the beating of his life. Unfortunately, to her immense surprise, Naruto reacted almost faster than she could see, and deflected her kick with a grunt of effort. Hiyori recovered quickly. Is that all you've got? Demanded Naruto as he quickly blocked an attempted punch to the gut. I thought you were gonna crush me. Incensed by his taunts, Hiyori resumed her attack, but to her frustration nearly every punch and kick she threw at the other blonde was either blocked, deflected or dodged. And the few hits she did get in barely affected him at all. Unfortunately Naruto was faced with the same problem. Hiyori was good at fighting, he had to admit. Kozuki watched the scuffle with great interest. Many souls when they first arrived in Soul Society felt awkward as they adjusted to their new body-less state, but Naruto had adapted to the change extremely quickly. He supposed that as a shinobi Naruto had been trained to fight for years, so naturally it would be something he adjusted to quickly. Finally, after nearly 10 minutes of watching the two youths go at it, Kozuki decided to step in. Before Hiyori could throw another punch he used a flash step to appear behind her. Hiyori, he said softly, placing his hand on her head, that's enough. Hiyori ignored him. Intent on wiping off the smile that had appeared on Naruto's face, she reached for the Zanpakuto once again, deliberately this time. However, before she could move so much as a single step, Urahara spoke again, this time coldly and forcefully. I said, that's enough. Hiyori froze at his frigid tone, and instantly stood down. Kozuki was a lot of things, a pervert and a slacker for sure, but he was far stronger than her. And was ultimately her captain. She roughly shook off Urahara's hand. "Che, I'm outta here," she muttered and stomped away. Naruto blinked, and then shouted after her, "Hey, get back here." But his challenge was ignored. Urahara sighed in exasperation, and began walking to the center building of the compound, motioning for Naruto to follow. Once he was sure the girl was out of hearing distance, Naruto spoke to Urahara. "Who was that?" he asked, for once refraining from using a crude insult. "That was my Lieutenant Hiyori Surugaki," replied Urahara. "I must apologize for her actions. She is rather sensitive about her appearance, and not very good with meeting other people." Naruto waved off his apology with a smile. "Don't worry about it, for a brat she's pretty fun. And pretty cute," he thought. But didn't voice this particular idea. Urahara smiled, glad that Naruto wasn't overly offended by his lieutenant. "Well, based on you and Hiyori-chan's little display, I think we can skip the first physical test," he said. "I believe I already have a fairly accurate idea of where your hand-to-hand combat skill level is." Naruto laughed a little. The blonde duo stepped inside one of the buildings. And Naruto noticed there were several other odd-looking machines humming and beeping. Urahara walked over to a closed door near the back. "I'll be right back," he said. "Please wait here. I'll be right back with the things we need." A few moments later, Kozuki returned bearing 2 large crystal balls and 2 wooden katana. "We'll do the remaining tests outside as well," he said. Naruto nodded and followed him outside. They walked for a bit before stopping in an unoccupied grassy area. After setting down the crystal balls, Urahara tossed one of the katanas to Naruto, who caught it mid-air and gave it a few swings, getting used to its weight. "First we will be testing your skills in swordplay," explained Urahara. Naruto frowned. "Why?" he asked. "The weapon of all Shinigami is the Zanpakuto," Kozuki answered. "All Zanpakuto initially take the form of a sword, and as such, it's required that you know how to fight with a sword to be a full-fledged Shinigami." Naruto huffed at Kozuki's statements, but said nothing as Kozuki moved a few feet away and brandished the other wooden sword. "All then, when you feel ready, come at me." As he moved to attack, Naruto silently cursed to himself. While he had been alive, he had always wanted to learn how to use a sword, but he had kept putting it off. With a quiet sigh, he charged forward with a simple side swing. And as he had expected, Urahara easily blocked the strike. In seconds, Naruto could see the gap in skill between the two of them, but Kozuki motioned for him to continue. After about 15 minutes, Urahara held up his hand, signaling the end of the test. Naruto sighed as he lowered his hands, disappointed that he had been unable to even land a single hit on Kozuki the entire time. "All right, Naruto, I now have an accurate assessment of your swordplay skill level. While I can tell you're completely inexperienced with sword fighting, it's okay, with training you'll improve. Now let's move on to your spirit energy assessment." Naruto nodded eagerly and placed his wooden sword on and handed him one of the crystal balls. "In your realm you utilized a type of energy known as chakra, correct?" asked Urahara. Naruto nodded again. "Tell me about it," the captain ordered. After a moment, Naruto remembered the simple lecture his teammate Sakura had once given him. Chakra is the power that is formed by mixing physical and spiritual energy. He paused, trying to remember more before continuing. "Physical energy is the energy that is made as you train and exercise the body, and spiritual energy comes from somewhere within." "Very good, Naruto-kun," Kozuki said with a smile. "To clarify though, a person's spiritual energy or Ryoryoku comes directly from the soul itself. Because you no longer have a physical body, you can't use chakra. But it is possible for you to use your spiritual power directly." So what can you do with this Ryoryoku stuff?" asked Naruto, both curious and excited. "We'll get to that in a moment," Kozuki replied. "For now, I want you to see if you can draw out your own." Naruto nodded and lowered himself to the ground. He assumed the meditation pose he had learned to gather nature chakra, becoming preternaturally still and focused his attention in on himself. He wasn't sure how long he was meditating for, but eventually he noticed a pool of some sort of warm energy laying dormant. "I think I found it," he said aloud, opening his eyes, and startling Kozuki. "But what exactly am I supposed to do?" he asked. "Try to pull some of that energy into your hands and push it into the crystal ball. But don't be discouraged if nothing happens on your first try," Kozuki responded. As a demonstration, he too began feeding his Ryoryoku into the other crystal ball. Naruto watched entranced. As Kozuki's crystal orb pulsed once, before a crimson bubble of energy, nearly 5 feet in diameter materialized from thin air, with the elder man in the exact center. "Go on, Naruto, give it a try," encouraged Kozuki. With a thought, Naruto effortlessly found the energy and began channeling the warm power through his hands and into his crystal ball. It felt almost the same as his chakra, but lighter somehow. More flowing. From the outside, Kozuki watched absolutely astonished as a perfectly circular emerald Raryoku orb, nearly as large as his own, formed around Naruto almost instantly. His control is close to perfect, he mused to himself silently, quite impressive. "All right Naruto, now I need you bring your Raryoku back inside your body," he commanded. Once again Isuke watched fascinated as Naruto flawlessly manipulated his Raryoku, easily pulling the energy forming the bubble back into his body. "Very good Naruto, your Raryoku control is excellent," he said, clapping his hands. Understatement of the century, he thought to himself. Naruto smiled at the praise, pleased with himself. "I used to have really terrible control over my chakra," he admitted. With some really intense training it improved a lot, but this came to me verily easily. Raryoku is a lot easier to guide." "That's amazing Naruto-kun," replied Urahara serenely, his scientific side still distracted by the unusual control Naruto had demonstrated. He shook his head after a few seconds and focused on his student. "Now then, Raryoku is the power source behind all the abilities we Shinigami use," he said. "The most basic form of spirit power manipulation can be used to boost one's physical strength and speed to superhuman levels." Naruto nodded. "Just like chakra," he mused. Quote, "Spirit power is also used to perform that high-speed movement technique I was using earlier," Kozuki said. He paused, and then vanished from view, reappearing nearly halfway across the compound. Naruto nearly jumped out of his own skin. But before he could react, Kozuki reappeared, back in his original position. "We call it flash step, and it's another skill that's practically required for all Shinigami to know." A wicked grin flashed across Naruto's face. That was definitely a technique he had to learn. Spirit power is also used to power the special abilities of Zanpakuto, but we'll talk more about those later, Kisuke said. The other most common use of spirit power, however, is to perform Kido. "Kido?" asked Naruto, once again wholly unfamiliar with the term. "Kido are actual spells and techniques that we Shinigami use to combat and defend against hollows," replied Kozuki. "There also exist sealing and unsealing spells, as well as healing spells." "Could you please show me one?" asked Naruto with stars in his eyes. Fascinated by the prospect of this Kido. He had always looked forward to learning new powerful techniques, it was one of the things that drove him on in life. Kozuki chuckled at his enthusiasm, which was rare among most elder Shinigami. "Sure," he said amicably. "Let's see which one to use," he mused quietly. "Ah, I've got it." Naruto watched raptly as Kozuki raised his right hand, palm pointing out. Left hand gripping the wrist. Within seconds, a ball of red light, the size of a volleyball, appeared in the outward-facing palm. "Hado 31, Shakuho," declared Kozuki, atching with satisfaction as the ball of pure destructive power sped away from his hands. Naruto watched almost in awe as the orb flew a good distance away before it slammed into the ground, detonating in a large, violent explosion. "That was so cool," Naruto declared loudly, waving his arms up and down childishly. "That's almost as strong as my Rasenshuriken technique." Before Kozuki could reply, another Shinigami, this one dressed in the same outfit as Hiyori, appeared in the training area with some papers in his hands. "Urahara Taicho, I need you to take a look at this," the man said, thrusting the papers in his captain's face. Just as Kozuki began to tell the other Shinigami he was busy, he sensed Naruto flaring his Raryoku, and yell something from behind. "Hado 31, Shakuho, Ki." Suke whirled around and watched with his jaw dropped open, as Naruto executed a nearly flawless, if extremely weak, Kido on very first attempt. "That's impossible," whispered Kozuki, almost shocked. Flash back, 30 seconds ago. Without really knowing what he was doing, Naruto mimicked the exact pose Kozuki had been in moments ago, pulling out the energy of his soul, and tried to make it flow in the same manner as he had sensed from Kozuki. While he could no longer absorb natural energy, did notice that with concentration that he could sense not only his own spiritual energy but also Kozuki's and he swore that he could feel more energy just kind of floating around. Sage mode was gone, but he could still sense energy flows almost as well as he could when he was alive. He watched, fascinated, as the same type of red ball of pure destructive power shimmered into existence in front of his palm. Hado 31. Shakuho. He bellowed, causing the powerful sphere to fly away from him. With a surge of pride he happily watched as it exploded violently a good 50 yards away. He did note that his technique was not nearly as powerful, not even a quarter really, as Kozuki's, but still it was damn good, and it was fun. His jubilation was cut short moments later, when he felt Kozuki's hand land heavily on his shoulder. Naruto froze, fearing he had broken some sort of rule. However, when he turned to face the other man, what he saw on Urahara's face was not anger, it was a look akin to disbelief. Kozuki stared silently at the small crater Naruto's Kido spell had just created, deep in thought. There's no doubt about it, he thought. That was a functioning Shakuho spell. Such an act was virtually unheard of. While many Shinigami were adept in Kido, it still took at the very least days, or weeks of training to be able to use spells higher than level 20, let one alone without an incantation. Many didn't have the power reserves to do it period. Urahara suspected that Naruto's oddly near pay RFECT Raryoku control may have been the key, so he quickly decided to perform one more test. Naruto-kun, I would like to try something. One last test you could say, said Kozuki, removing his hand, his customary smile appearing back in place. At the sight of the smile reappearing, Naruto noticeably relaxed. Sure thing Kozuki-san, he said. What do I need to do? I am going to demonstrate another Kido spell. And afterward I want you to perform it, replied Urahara. Naruto nodded his head, to show his willing compliance. Which spell to try? Mused Kozuki to himself. He needed a spell that would be difficult to perform, but not impossible. After a few moments of deliberation he settled upon a moderately difficult Hado. Naruto watched intently as Urahara held both his arms out horizontally, palms facing out, and began gathering his Raryoku into them. After a few seconds Urahara spoke firmly, Hado 40 Kakusanden. From Kozuki's palms erupted a red beam of raw Raryoku, that was easily double the strength of the other spell. The beam hurtled forward for nearly 30 yards before sharply veering upwards into the sky. Naruto craned his neck back, and continued to watch, actively sensing and memorizing the way Kozuki's Raryoku currently flowed. The yellow beam attack performed a near 180 in the air, and then exploded into a hail of compressed energy balls, peppering the ground with over 24 mini craters, each about the size of a baseball and roughly 4 or 5 inches deep. When the technique finished, Kozuki faced Naruto and dropped his arms. Now it's your turn, he said lightly. Naruto breathed deeply, but nodded and held his arms out in front of himself, and began gathering his Raryoku. After mentally going over the flow pattern for the Raryoku one more time, he called out, Hado 40 Kakusanden. A beam of green energy burst from Naruto's palm a second later. Kozuki watched in satisfaction as Naruto performed his second Kido spell with the same ease as he had done with his first. Still astonished by the boy's amazing natural talent. Like the first spell, Naruto's was still weaker than Kozuki's, but the difference between them was noticeably less. Naruto frowned. I think I messed up, he said. When the last condensed energy ball faded away, Kozuki spoke up. Well done Naruto-kun, that was very impressive, he said. Naruto frowned. I think I messed up, he said. Kozuki blinked. Why? He asked. Your attack was red, mine was green, came the swift reply. Kozuki smirked. Raryoku manifests in different colors Naruto-kun, yours is green, mine is red, and many techniques will reflect that. Naruto smiled. Oh. Kozuki smiled again. I have to say, your natural talent with Kido is quite frankly astonishing, and what you've just done should be impossible. At Naruto's questioning gaze, Kozuki continued, Naruto, you just performed 2 mid-level Kido without breaking a sweat, and it takes most Shinigami months to move past the basic 10. Frankly, what's more incredible is that you manged them both without the incantation. Incantation? Asked Naruto blankly, unsure as to what Urahara was going on about. Normally when a Shinigami uses a Kido spell, They recite a specific incantation beforehand, explained Urahara. The incantation is used to guide one's Raryoku into the correct flow pattern, however with practice one can skip the incantation. But you said I could use a spell without the incantation, said Naruto. So what is the point? While it is true that over time one can skip the incantation, the spell is almost always drastically weakened, explained Urahara. Your inexperience with these spells' true incantations is why they were weaker than mine. When one can perform a spell, at full power, without an incantation it's acknowledge that you have achieved total mastery of the spell. It takes most Shinigami at least a year of practice before mastery of a single spell, occasionally it's just a few months for those who are really proficient in Raryalu manipulation. However you, Naruto-kun, in less than an hour have halfway mastered 2 spells already, well done. Naruto beamed at the praise he was given, immensely pleased that he had found something that he was really good at. You know, it's probably because I've already had a lot of practice in manipulating one type of energy. Raryoku moves almost the same way as chakra does. But it does feel a little different, he noted to Kozuki. Kozuki nodded absently. He had to remember to sit down with Naruto later so they could really talk about the differences and similarities. And so that he could experiment, air test Naruto's abilities. Well Naruto-kun, based on this little display, I've concluded that the best place to put you would most likely the Kidoshu, said Kozuki thoughtfully. Kidoshu? Asked Naruto, but Kozuki waved off his question. I am going to contact my friend Tessai, he will want to speak with you. With that Kozuki disappeared, leaving Naruto to his own devices, who promptly began firing off his spells, happily practicing his new powers. Almost an hour later 4 people were gathered into Urahara's private office, each sitting down around a table for some tea. On one side of the table Naruto sat next to Hiyori, who looked rather less than pleased at his presence. She somehow both pointedly and angrily ignored him. On the other side of the table Urahara sat next to a man who looked almost as strange as made a guy. The rather tall, deeply tanned man wore thick square glasses under his heavy-set eyebrows, plus he had the thickest mustache that Naruto had ever seen. The man, who Naruto had been introduced to as Tessai, took a sip of his tea before addressing Naruto in his rather deep and gravelly voice. Urahara-san has informed me that you've managed to do something quite remarkable, Naruto-kun, he said. Would you care to explain how? He asked casually. Naruto sipped his tea before answering. The only way how I can describe it is that while I watched Kozuki-san sensed and memorized the way his Raryoku energy flowed, and then I just tried to make my own follow the same pattern. Tessai nodded his head thoughtfully. I see. If you don't mind I would like a demonstration, he said. Naruto quickly drained the remainder of his tea and said, sure. Enthusiastically, if there was one thing he loved, it was jutsu training. The 4 left the office and traveled back to the training ground where Naruto had practiced earlier. It was late now, nearly dusk, but there was still enough light for all to observe. Tessai stood in front and signaled that he would begin. He raised a single hand above his head, palm out to the sky, and began channeling up his Raryoku into his arm. He began to chant, "The nameless king watches. The darkness marches onward. Cut and destroy, Hado 16, Kenzan." He called out firmly. With his full concentration focused solely on the man in front of him, Naruto watched as a orange disc of Raryoku shimmered into existence, hovering bare centimeters over Tessai's palm. The disc began to spin, quickly gaining speed until it gave off an audible hum. A few moments later, Tessai threw the disc as hard as he could at some trees. The group watched as the orange disc cut its way through nearly 20 trees before dissipating. Tessai stepped back and motioned for Naruto to begin. Holding his right hand in the air, Naruto charged up his Raryoku, ideally noting that instead of orange an emerald disc formed above his palm. Hado 16, Kenzan, Naruto murmured, skipping the incantation, which if he admitted he couldn't remember half of. While his body subconsciously performed the attack, this one flawlessly, he was thinking, this attack, it's almost the same as my Rasenshuriken. He shook his head, determined not to let his thoughts go that way, because they would invariably lead to him thinking about home, and about how despite his current wonder, he was still dead. No, he couldn't let himself think about it for now. With extra force he threw the spell forward, and it cut through the trees like butter. When his Kenzan fully had faded away, Naruto turned back to Tessai expectantly. Pleased that he had learned yet another spell. That was indeed a flawless Kido, Tessai rumbled in a pleased tone, not letting his shock show at all. Well done, I can see why Urahara-san recommended you for the Kidoshu. Quote, what exactly is the Kidoshu? Asked Naruto. Kozuki had said the same thing earlier, but had brushed off his question. The Kidoshu or the Kido Corps is a unit that is adjunct to the Gote 13. Dedicated to the use, mastery, and creation of Kido that are used to protect and aid all souls, replied Tessai. As I am the current Kidoshu commander, it is well within my power to bring you in. However, ultimately the choice is yours. With a broad smile on his face, Naruto proclaimed, I accept, and I swear someday I will be the greatest Kido master ever. Kozuki and Tessai smiled. But Hiyori scowled, Che, a weakling like you. In your dreams. Naruto glared at her, just you wait Hiyori-chan, he retorted, I never go back on my word. Despite the fact that it was a beautiful day in Soul Society, with the sun shining and but a few fluffy clouds in the azure sky, all was not well. A heavy, oppressive air of tension hung over the court of pure souls. Within his office, deep inside the 1st Division compound, Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni, the captain commander of the 13 divisions, waited impatiently for his guest to arrive. Despite his seemingly calm face, those who knew him well could discern the fact that he was currently very angry. Most of his ire stemmed from the fact that the Soul Society, his home, was currently in the midst of an invasion perpetrated by 5 individuals. Ryoka, who had launched their assault just 3 days prior. While the general populace remained unharmed, there had been a few notable exceptions. First there was Madarame Makaku, the 3rd seat of the 11th Division, who had confronted one of the invaders moments after they had broken in. While most would have assumed the odds had been Akaku's favor, him being the 3rd seat of a division known for their fighting prowess, the fight had ended with the 3rd seat being critically injured, and subsequently placed within the intensive care unit inside the 4th Division hospital unconscious. Then to everyone's consternation, not even a full day later, Lieutenant Abarai Renji, of the 6th Division, had confronted the same invader as Akaku, and he too was critically injured. It'd been both infuriating and humiliating to learn that some unknown enemy possessed at least low lieutenant level strength. But today, Soul Society had been dealt an even greater blow to its pride. Earlier that day, Captain Zaraki Kenpachi of the 11th Division had been defeated by the same invader who had just barely bested Renji. Zaraki Kenpachi was a man, if he could even be called as such, who thrived on fighting. For him, breathing, eating, and fighting was essentially his existence summed up in a nutshell. And he had been beaten, by a human no less. After Kenpachi's defeat, Yamamoto had paid him a visit, and had learned just who their dangerous enemy was. It was a human youth, one who was almost still a child, who had gained Shinigami powers. The idea of it still angered him. Nearly 2 weeks prior to the invasion, Yamamoto had learned that one of his Shinigami, a woman named Kuchiki Rukia, had illegally shared her powers with a human, and had been concealing that fact for months. So Yamamoto had sent the captain of the 6th Division, who coincidentally was also her legal guardian, Kuchiki Byakuya, and his lieutenant Abarai Renji to both retrieve the lawbreaker, and to deal with the human. Byakuya had reported once he had returned that he had easily stripped the human of his stolen powers, and had left him for dead. And now, not even 2 weeks later, the boy was back. Somehow once more wielding the powers of a Shinigami, with 4 unknown individuals at his side. The 4 humans were waging a small-scale war against the Court of Pure Souls. It almost made Yamamoto sick to think about it. So after Kenpachi's humiliating loss, Yamamoto decided forego his pride and decided to bring in some help, calling upon the 2nd strongest person in all of Soul Society, a man whose power approached his own. It was 2 minutes past noon, when he sensed a familiar Raryoku signature approach his door. Yamamoto ceased his reflection on the past few days, and at the soft knock on his door spoke firmly. Come in. A young, blonde-haired man, who seemed to be about 24 or so years old, smiled as he entered the captain commander's personal office. Hey there, Yamamoto-san. The man greeted jovially once he was inside. With an inaudible sigh at the blatant lack of decorum, Yamamoto focused his full attention on the man, taking in the younger man's appearance. It had been a few years since they had interacted directly after all. The newcomer stood at about 5 inches 10 and wore the standard Shinigami uniform, but with a blue robe over top. The robe had the insignia of the Kido Corps stitched on both lapels of his robe. He was wearing dark tabi and carried a ceremonial shakuho in his hand, and his zanpakuto strapped to his waist. "Do you know why you are here?" asked Yamamoto bluntly. Unwilling to waste any time on simple pleasantries, now was not the time. "Of course I do, you need me to take care of the nasty Ryoka that's been wiping the floor with you guys," replied the man with a small laugh. And Yamamoto bit back a grimace. Sometimes the other commander could be very rude, but he also knew that when it mattered, his college knew how to behave properly. "Don't worry. I think I know just where to start. With your permission, sir, I'll begin at once." At Yamamoto's nod of affirmation, the young man grinned wildly, then without a word Uzumaki Naruto, commander of the Kido Corps and Kido Grand Aster, turned about face, and marched out of the room. Upon leaving Yamamoto's office, Naruto smiled. This was gonna be fun. Yamamoto never let him run around freely anymore. Not since one of his prank spells had gotten out of hand, which wasn't even his fault. But to get to challenge someone who had defeated one of Soul Society's captains was even better. He closed his eyes, letting his senses extend past his own self, and began searching. A few moments later he sensed a group of Raryoku signatures near the Shrine of Penitence. And he sensed, way off in the distance, a large source of power making its way to the shrine as well. He smirked, and focusing on the group, while using their power as a beacon, he flash-stepped away from the captain commander's door with a soft whoosing sound. A minute or so later, he arrived, still grateful after decades, that the sensation of extreme high-speed movement no longer affected him in the slightest, on the Den bridge that led to the entrance of the shrine, just as the three unfamiliar figures he had been tracking began to emerge from the tower. To let them know he was there and as a way to intimidate them, he flared his Raryoku, creating a wave of spiritual pressure, or Ryutsu, that was about 25% of his full power, focusing it on the three people ahead of him, which he saw composed of 2 males and a female. The man in front wore a white hakama, with a green sleeveless cover, and black pants with white spirals on the thighs. Naruto also noticed the hilt of some type of blade sticking out from behind the stranger's back. Once again stretching out his mental senses, he measured the man's Raryoku level, discovering it to only be 6th seat in terms of strength. Disappointed, Naruto spoke up. His attention fully directed to the man in front. "You are not the one I am searching for." The man visibly tensed, but Naruto's attention was now focused on the other 2 people. He looked at a raven-haired girl who was breathing heavily as his Ryutsu weighed down on her, garbed in the white outfit of the prisoner. This must be Kuchiki Rukia, he thought. I wonder why these people are trying to take her. Dismissing the question as unimportant for now, he shifted his gaze to the last man in the trio. When his eyes fell on the skinny, raven-haired male, his gaze hardened. The last male was definitely a Shinigami. The uniform and zanpakuto at his side, along with the 4th Division medical satchel across his chest, was a clear indicator of that fact. A seated officer, one of the 13 Division's own soldiers, was aiding a prisoner in their escape, and helping an enemy as well. If there was one thing Naruto hated, it was traitors. He had dealt with them enough in both life and death, and unconsciously he began to emit a larger amount of his crushing Ryutsu, watching impassively as the trio began to shake in fear. Well, he would take care of this problem quickly. He began walking forward slowly, but then the first man, the one in front, regained control over his faculties, moved to stop him from advancing. "Move aside," Naruto commanded. His fight was not with this man. "Screw you," the man said arrogantly. A weak smile on his face, poorly hiding his fear. Naruto sighed, and pointed his right index finger at him. "I warned him," he thought. "Hado number 1. Show," Naruto intoned flatly, and loosed his Raryoku. He watched in apathy as the oddly dressed man was blasted back nearly 20 feet, tumbling rolling head over heels, and was subsequently knocked unconscious. "Ganju-san!" screamed Kuchiki Rukia as the man went flying past her rapidly. Naruto idly took note of his opponent's name, but the true focus of his attention was truly solely directed on the traitorous Shinigami ahead of him. "You there, Shinigami," he barked. "What is your name, and divisional rank?" "Yamada ha Hanataro, say 7th seat," of the 4th Division, the terrified Shinigami squeaked, stuttering in fear. Naruto placed his right hand on the hilt of his Zanpakuto, while electricity began to crackle between his fingers in his left hand, which hung loosely at his side. 7th Seat Yamata Hanataro. For your crimes in attempting to illegally free the criminal known Kuchiki Rukia, and the crime of helping an invader, I hereby sentence you to death, intoned Naruto seriously, this is your execution. Just as Naruto was about to fully unsheath his blade, something, or rather someone stayed his hand. Naruto tensed sharply as a hand landed on his shoulder. Easy there Naruto-san, spoke the familiar voice of one Jashiro Yukitaki, captain of the 13th Division softly from behind the blonde. Naruto quickly turned his body just enough to see the captain, while still eyeing Rukia and Hanataro. No need to take this too far, the white-haired captain continued lightly. While the man's tone was soft, there was steel in his eyes, and Naruto knew it would be pointless to argue. With a monumental amount of effort, Naruto reined in his anger at the traitor, but it wasn't until the electricity crackling around his hand had finally faded away completely, that Yukitaki moved his own hand from Naruto's shoulder. Turning to face the white-haired captain, Naruto calmly asked, "Why are you here, Yukitaki-san?" "I could ask you the same thing, Naruto-san," replied Yukitaki swiftly. "It's not often that the Kido Corps commander himself is seen around here." At the mention of Naruto's title, both Hanataro and Rukia paled considerably. "Oh God, we all could have been annihilated in an instant," panicked Rukia. While Hanataro looked about one step away from passing out. While neither had actually met, or even seen, the newest Kido commander until then, it was very well known that one did not become commander of the Kido Corps without having a considerable amount power. Power that placed one near the level of the captain commander himself. "I was asked by Yamamoto Sotaicho to help with the current invasion," answered Naruto coolly. "I came here because I sensed foreign Ryutsu signatures moving towards the Senzaku. Has the situation really gotten so bad, that you of all people needed to be brought in?" Mused Yukitaki aloud, he wondered how had things come to this. Before Naruto could reply, a massive and uncontrolled Ryutsu appeared in the sky moving downward, closing in on the group on the bridge quickly. Stepping back a couple feet, Naruto and the others watched as a wild-looking, orange-haired boy dropped out of the sky directly in front of Rukia. With what appeared to be a giant avian wing made of pure bone growing out of something clenched in his hand. Instantly sensing the depth of the boy's power, Naruto tensed. "This is the one," he thought excitedly as he watched the boy move toward his friends, ignoring himself and Jashiro. The boy moved past Rukia without a word, and clapped Hanataro on the shoulder. "You okay, Hanataro?" he asked. "I wouldn't have sent you on ahead if I had known it was gonna be so rough." A look of relief swept over the terrified Shinigami's features. "Ichigo," Hanataro said weakly. Seeing Hanataro's grateful smile, the Ichigo turned back to Rukia. "Yo, Rukia, I've come to get you outta here," he said casually. With tears in her eyes, Rukia launched herself forward, and latched onto his waist. "Ichigo, you idiot, I told you to stay away," she yelled. "You can't fight this guy. Please," she begged. "Geez, what's with you?" demanded Ichigo somewhat harshly as he gently extricated himself from Rukia's arms. "I came here for you, God. You could at least try to act happy, now shut up so I can deal with them." With that, Ichigo promptly turned away from Rukia, and stepped forward towards Naruto and Jashiro. "Which one of you knocked out Ganju?" he asked seriously as he gripped the hilt of his Zanpakuto. Naruto stepped forward. "That would be me," he replied casually, not fazed by the youth's posturing in the slightest. "You are the one who beat Zaraki Kenpachi, yes?" "Yeah, that was me," answered Ichigo. "What of it?" "Nothing," Naruto smirked. "This just means for once I don't have to hold back too much." With a burst of speed, Naruto reached into the sleeves of his blue robe, and drew out 6 rectangular slips of paper, and threw them towards Ichigo. Curiously, the sheets of paper did not flutter to the ground, as one would expect. But rather they glowed, and spread outwards in 4 directions. One flew behind Ichigo, one behind Naruto, one in the air above, one to each side, and one floating above the chasm below the bridge. Second later, a translucent yellow box of energy nearly 300 feet in diameter appeared, cutting off Ichigo and Naruto from everyone else. Bakudo 47, Kami no Shoheki, intoned Naruto solemnly. Sealing the binding spell he used. What did you just do? Demanded Ichigo warily as he eyed the 4 walls surrounding them. I used a binding spell that uses those 6 pieces of paper to create a barrier that is extremely difficult to break from the outside, answered Naruto. After all, we can't have just anyone interfering now, can we? He asked with a smile that promised pain on his face. Without warning, Naruto flared about 40% of his Raryoku as Ryutsu, and his green aura sprang into existence, making it appear he was standing in the midst of a pillar of burning green fire. Ichigo, however, wasn't fazed. He simply flared his own Azure Ryutsu, and pulled his almost comically large Zanpakuto off his back, and pointed the cleaver forward in a direct challenge. I'm impressed that you can remain completely unaffected by my Ryutsu, Naruto complimented. Ha! Snorted Ichigo, that Kenpachi guy had twice as much Ryutsu as this, and I beat him too. Naruto smirked. What is your name, boy? He asked. Kurosaki Ichigo, answered Ichigo. And you? Uzumaki Naruto, came the swift reply. Now then, let's get started. Before Ichigo could blink, Naruto had glowing red spheres of energy in the palm of his hands, which he then merged into one giant crimson ball. Ichigo could tell, even with his horrible Raryoku sensing abilities, that his opponent's opening attack was going to be powerful. Readying his blade, the one called Zangetsu, Ichigo poured his spirit power into the weapon of his soul, and charged up his own special technique. At the same time, both combatants roared out the name of their attacks. Getsuga Tensho. Hado 72, Super Red Cannon. Naruto's crimson sphere of destruction rocketed out of his hands at an incredible speed, and a blue, crescent-shaped blast of raw Raryoku blasted out from Ichigo's Zanpakuto. The 2 Raryoku constructs collided violently, smashing into each other with terrifying power. For a few brief moments the 2 energy attacks fought for dominance, until finally, the Getsuga Tensho finally cut through Naruto's Hado, continuing on its path towards, until it slammed into something Ichigo couldn't see, and fizzled away, leaving behind a large cloud of smoke in its wake. Ichigo smirked. He had cut through the attack, and assumed that had won, but his smile quickly turned to a frown, when he saw as the smoke cleared, that there was no trace of Naruto anywhere. Ichigo suddenly felt himself freeze up when he heard somebody whisper in his ear, "Please," as if that attack could beat me. Caught completely flat-footed, the human turned Shinigami, had no time to brace himself as Naruto brutally kicked him in the back, sending him rolling away. He hit the ground hard, gasping in pain as his still wounded body protested the treatment. Naruto, from where he stood, raised his right arm, and pointed the index finger at his opponent. Goodbye Kurosaki Ichigo, he said as miniature, green-tinted, Ult's electricity began to crackle around his fingers. Too bad this fight couldn't last longer. At that instant something collided with Naruto's barrier from above. The bridge shook, and with an scion of Raryoku someone smashed right through his technique and he found himself entered in a binding spell. This surprised the Kido master greatly, as he knew that it would take high captain class Raryoku to pull off a stunt like that. His confusion quickly turned to fury as he saw the new attacker. A slim figure dropped in front of Ichigo, one that Naruto recognized all too well. "You!" he screamed. "How dare you show your face around here?" The focus of his ire was a dark-skinned, purple-haired female, an enemy he had never wanted to see again. Shihoin Yoruichi, the self-titled goddess of Flash, did not bother to reply, but instead raised her hand, and a wall of light appeared between them, and she directed her attention to Ichigo. "Yoruichi-sensei, you came here to rescue me, didn't you?" said Ichigo weakly as he got back on his feet. "I realize that, and appreciate it, but at the moment I need you to step aside, so I can beat this guy." Yoruichi cocked her head. "Beat him?" she asked incredulously as she jerked her thumb at Naruto. "You think you can beat this guy?" Stunned by her answer, Ichigo was at a loss for a reply. "Ichigo, do you remember the cannonball that brought you here?" she asked suddenly. "The one that needed the 4 of you to power it?" At Ichigo's slow nod she continued, "The man in front of you could have powered it by himself, without an ounce of strain. He is Uzumaki Naruto, commander of the Kido Corps, a Kido master, and a former friend." Hearing the last part, Naruto's temper erupted, as he began to fight off Yoruichi's binding spell. "Friends," he bellowed as his ryutsu flared. After what the three of you did, you think of us as friends. Once again Yoruichi did bother to answer, however, she did swiftly turn on Ichigo, plunging her hand into a gash on his waist. Ichigo gasped weakly and immediately slipped into unconsciousness. Before he hit the ground Yoruichi grabbed him, and threw him over her shoulder. I can't explain now, she finally said to Naruto. But when this is all over maybe I can. She turned to move away, but suddenly Naruto was in front of her. Where do you think you're going? Demanded Naruto, as he began to draw out his Zanpakuto. Yoruichi disappeared from his view faster than he could even see, however he could sense where her Raryoku had moved. Looking up to the rooftop of the shrine, his blue eyes bored into her golden ones. 3 days. And I promise he will be a better match for you, Yoruichi yelled down to him, indicating to Ichigo. In the meantime, take a close look around, and look underneath the underneath. Naruto scowled viciously and began to step forward. Yuichi waved, and said, see ya. Then she disappeared once more, Flash stepping away as fast as she could, until he could no longer sense her, or Ichigo. With a snarl of frustration Naruto sheathed his sword, and began walking away from the shrine, ignoring the other 4 people entirely. Uzumaki-san, where are you going? Asked Yukitake as he fell into step with the blonde. To wait for them, replied Naruto flatly, meaning Ichigo and Yoruichi. And to get some answers. What about the prisoner, the invader and the 4th division officer? Inquired Yukitake. Do what you will with them, my orders technically only deal with that orange-haired human boy, answered Naruto coldly without a glance back. But, he aid raising his voice so they could all hear him, if I ever suspect you of traitorous activity, I will cut you down myself. As he flash-stepped Shrine of Penitence there was only one thing occupied Naruto's thoughts. Hiyori. In the center of the Seraite asterisk there stood an imposing, towering structure, adorned with multiple towers and spires. The structure, made of a pure pale marble stood. This citadel was known as the Senzaiku, or the Shrine of Penitence, and it served as the public prison of Soul Society. At the top of the uppermost tower a single wooden bridge connected to a massive rocky mesa atop a cliff, which was devoid of any kind of vegetation. This large outcropping was known as the Sokyoku Hill, and was the site used most often for public displays, including high-profile executions. Currently, at the Sokyoku Hill plateau 9 figures stood in silence. 8 stood silently side by side in a row, whilst the 9th individual, clad in the pure white robes of prisoners, stood before the group. With her back to them, arms bound securely, waiting atop a stone platform. She was Kuchiki Rukia, the lieutenant of the 13th Division, and now she stood accused of a most grievous crime indeed. A soft breeze picked up, and a strand of short, raven black hair fell between her deep purple eyes, as it often did, and she reflexively tried to brush it aside like always. Unfortunately, the bakudo layered on her prevented her arms from moving at all. So she closed her eyes and tried to ignore both it, and the thing she stood on. Towering above all of the Shinigami were 2 60-foot tall, large pillars connected by a thick stone slab cut into a perfect rectangle. Across from the execution platform was the great halberd known as the Sokyoku, a weapon in which was said to reside the power of 100 Zanpakuto. It stood upright, anchored to the ground by 12 thick ropes, each with almost dozens of symbols painted on them. Regarding the other 8 Shinigami, 4 carried the rank of captain. 3 were recognized as lieutenants, and the last was Captain Commander Yamamoto himself. A somber feeling enfolded the group, the air itself was thick with almost palpable tension. Everyone knew that something was going to happen, and soon. With a quick glance at the sun, Yamamoto, who of course was leading the execution, gleaned a rough estimate of the time. He let out an imperceptible sigh, turned, and faced the bound figure once more. He's late, he thought. Of course he is. Thankfully it wasn't but a few moments that, with a soft whoosh of air, the accompanying sound of the flash step technique, Uzumaki Naruto appeared. As befitting an event such as this, he was garbed in the full regalia of his station. Once more he wore the deep blue robes and carried the ceremonial shakuho. Shortly after his arrival, 12 additional persons appeared, all of whom were wearing the traditional clothing of the Kido Corps, an outfit which looked very similar to the standard Shinigami uniform, but also sporting a garment that covered most of their faces, except the eyes, extending almost all the way to their feet. With a quick nod to the other captains, Naruto took his place across from Commander Yamamoto while his men arranged themselves in a circle around the massive halberd. Each took one of the ropes that anchored the Sokyoku in their hands, silently awaiting their command. Seeing as all were present, Yamamoto finally spoke. "Kuchiki Rukia, do you have anything you would like to say?" he asked the prisoner. Rukia opened her eyes once more, and replied, "Yes, I would ask for just one thing, Yamamoto-sama. I beg of you to let the humans return back to the living world unharmed." For a long moment Yamamoto remained silent, seemingly contemplating her request. Behind him the large halberd that was the sealed form of the Sokyoku was enveloped by a blue oddly soothing Ryutsu aura. The Kido Corps members had already begun the weapons unsealing. "Very well, just as you asked, I shall send the humans back unharmed, the dawn after your execution," Yamamoto finally said. A small contented smile passed over Rukia's lips when she heard the commander's words. thank you so much," she replied softly, almost serenely. At least her dear friends would be safe. At the end of the line, far from Rukia, one Kotetsu Azane, a tall, young-looking woman with gray eyes and short messy silver hair sporting the badge of 4th Division Lieutenant on her forearm, frowned and murmured to herself quietly, "How cruel, he definitely isn't planning on sending them back alive. It isn't him being cruel. Azane," spoke somebody beside her softly, "it's him being merciful." With a start Azane realized that her captain, Hana Retsu, had heard her. Azane blushed. "Oh," she said lamely, unable to think of a reply. Hana Retsu was a slender and very youthful-looking woman with blue eyes and long black hair. She was wearing her normal captain's uniform, and her long hair was, as it almost always was, worn as a large braid, that framed her face, and trailed down the front of her body. Hana continued, "If one's death is unavoidable, then one should die without regrets. It's a mercy to let her die in peace. Release the Sokyoku," commanded Yamamoto suddenly, abruptly cutting their conversation off. Almost instantly the visible blue Raryoku surrounding the shaft of the halberd intensified greatly, then one by one the ropes around the shaft snapped, and disintegrated into reishi particles. Naruto then stepped onto the platform, and stood in front of Rukia. "Sorry," he whispered to her. A look of genuine sorrow on his face, which surprised her. The man before her had but 3 days prior blasted one of her friends unconscious, and had very nearly executed another on the spot. Looking into his sapphire blue eyes, she could see no trace hostility at all. What happened? She wondered, but didn't voice the thought. Naruto sighed, but orders are orders. He quickly made a single-hand seal, reminiscent of the ones from his shinobi days, and stepped back off the platform. The spell binding Rukia's hands behind her back instantly vanished, allowing her mobility once more. Her freedom, however, was brief, and within seconds she once again lost control of her muscles. So she watched with emotional detachment as her arms were raised and stretched out. Wards under the command of someone else. From the floor of the platform she stood upon, 3 identical stone cubes floated upwards, 2 of them positioning themselves directly in front of her hands, while the third hovered before her feet. After the stones had settled into place, Rukia as well began to levitate, her body immobile because of Naruto's spell, until she was face to face with the blade of the Sokyoku. For a time, she floated, suspended in the air like a living crucifix. For a minute, it was as if time itself had stopped, all went silent and still. The moment passed, the calm shattered, and the Sokyoku underwent its true release. From the base of the halberd a veritable torrent of red and orange flames erupted, spiraling around the shaft, and reaching high into the sky. Quickly, the torrential flames began to shift, and move, molding and shaping themselves into a distinct shape. Rukia watched in trepidation as the flames eventually settled themselves and beheld the massy phoenix made of pure flames that was the Sokyoku's true form. "King Kako!" thundered Yamamoto far below her, his cloak flapping wildly in the winds of the Ryutsu. The blade released, this is the true form of the Sokyoku's halberd. The final enforcer of executions. Once he passes through a criminal, their sentence will end. Kuchiki Rukia closed her eyes again, her thoughts mainly devoted to the orange-haired human boy who had changed her life. A boy who she dared to hope would be able to keep on living, even without her. A single tear slid down her face. "Sayonara," she whispered aloud forlornly. As if sensing her emotions, the fiery apparition drew back, then burst forward with a swift lunge. The phoenix, which had claimed the lives of dozens, all without a single shred resistance, suddenly found itself blocked by an immobile, unyielding force. To the shock of all but one person, the Sokyoku did not speed through Kuchiki Rukia, but collided with some unseen force with a titanic boom. A shock wave of displaced air sent waves of flame billowing crazily into the sky. When the view finally cleared, the Shinigami present could see the gigantic form of King Kako vainly struggling as it pushed against the flat side of one Kurosaki Ichigo's Zanpakuto. The sword strongly resembled an oversized kyber knife, with a black blade and single silver edge. It had no tsuba and no proper hilt. And it is almost as long as Ichigo was tall. The human stood resolute, even while the great phoenix pushed against it. His brown traveler's cloak flapped in the breeze, and they could see. Clutched in his other hand was the prone form of Kuchiki Rukia. Made it, he said aloud quietly, but of course, she was the only one who could hear him. Far below, Naruto grinned wildly. It's about time he got here. But I guess the hero is always late, he thought, while aloud he muttered to no one in particular, power of 100 Zanpakuto my ass. He seemed to be least surprised by what was happening. 3 days prior, he had confronted Ichigo, and had been halted by his one-time friend, Yoruichi. She had grabbed the boy, and as she was leaving she had told him to look underneath the underneath. Which had initially infuriated him. He remembered when he had first shared the phrase with her, a lifetime of his mentors when he was alive had taught him the phrase. Which stressed us to not only look behind what is apparent, to distrust the visible or obvious, but to also distrust the hidden. To never assume that there is only one level of deception within people or within the strategy of an opponent. And always look for multiple layers. So while it galled him to listen to her, after he had calmed down, he took her advice. What he quickly found out was that there was something very wrong in Seoul society. And the invasion was just the tip of the iceberg. So he had spent the time investigating the situation, and gathering information on the invaders, and had learned that Ichigo's sole goal was to rescue the woman who had saved his life by illegally giving him her powers. Personally he felt that Rukia had done the right thing, but then a demand from the Central 46 had come ordering the Kido Corps to use the Sokyoku. And as he had told Rukia, orders were orders. But he knew, from experience, that a guy like Ichigo would never just let his friend die. There was something else going on in the background. Someone's machinations were coming to bear, but try as he might, he found no solid leads. So he decided to let things play out, and to wait and be ready. The King Kako Phoenix prepared to attack again, while Ichigo, who was still holding onto Rukia, readied his own large blade. Moments before the two forces collided again, what appeared to be a large, thick purple rope somehow wound itself around the creature's neck, despite it being literally made of fire. At one end of was a large, rectangular weight of some kind, nearly 2 feet tall, and 4 inches thick, that dropped to the ground. Dragging the King Kako down even likely weighed well over 100 pounds. Safe, exclaimed someone loudly from behind. Whirling around, Naruto and the other Shinigami came face to face with Captain Kyoraku Shunsui with one hand on the weight, and Captain Yukitake Jashiro holding a red shield with the other end of the rope tied to it. The front of the shield was emblazoned with the Shihoin family symbol. A symbol that made Naruto glare. Shunsui Kyoraku et al., light-skinned Shinigami with high cheekbones, gray eyes and long wavy brown hair, smiled at them nonchalantly. His hair, like always, was in a long ponytail, with long bangs that framed the left side of his face. For once he was not wearing his ridiculous straw hat, but still wore the hideous pink, flowered lady's kimono. Jashiro looked the same as always, if a little paler than usual. Before anyone could move to stop them, Shunsui and Jashiro took hold of the rope, and began pouring their Raryoku through it into King Kako. Within seconds the massive phoenix made of fire exploded spectacularly, globs of fire raining down, but dissipating harmlessly before anyone was struck. Meanwhile Ichigo and Rukia conversed briefly. Though none on the ground could exactly hear what they said, before Ichigo set Rukia down, and turned away abruptly, jumping atop one of the execution stand's pillars. The orange red youth began rapidly twirling his Zanpakuto around by the cloth wrappings on its hilt, and soon afterwards everyone present could feel his Ryutsu pressing down on them, which was impressive one so young. A moment later, Ichigo slammed his Zanpakuto point first into the execution stand, while his Ryutsu aura tripled, and became visible as a luminescent blue pillar of light. The entire Executee Oner's structure glowed with foreign Raryoku coursing though it, until BOOM. With a violent explosion of light and raw power, the ancient Sokyoku execution pillars were destroyed by one single human Ryoka. Ichigo stood triumphantly on the remains of the stands, with Zangetsu slung over his shoulder proudly, and helped Rukia up with his other arm. He felt so much stronger now. "You idiot," she choked out. And Ichigo sputtered a confused, "What?" On the ground, Naruto watched silently as Ichigo and Rukia, who now stood on her own, argued for a minute, until Ichigo cut her off mid-sentence and turned east. Following Ichigo's gaze, Naruto saw 6th Division Lieutenant Aburai Renji, who was obviously still heavily injured, wave to Ichigo and Rukia from about 50 yards away. "Oi Renji," bellowed Ichigo, loud enough for all to hear, as he hefted Rukia above his shoulder. "Catch." Then, in a frankly absurd way, Ichigo proceeded to throw Kuchiki Rukia, who was screaming hysterically all the way, much like a football, straight at the red-haired lieutenant. It was all poor Naruto could do not to burst out laughing at the sight, but he had a role to play, and a reputation to keep up after all. Earning away from the trio, he spoke quietly to his commander. "Commander Yamamoto, do your orders regarding Kurosaki Ichigo still stand?" he asked quietly. "They do," Yamamoto replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. Naruto nodded. "Very well, and what of Jashiro?" he began, before being cut off. "I will deal with them," replied Yamamoto darkly. Naruto involuntarily shivered, sure he knew he was strong. He was after all the second strongest person in Soul Society currently, but Yamamoto was still in a class of his own. At that moment Renji scooped up the rather disheveled Rukia and took off as fast as he could. All lieutenants, after him, barked Sui Feng, the current leader of the Onmitsukido. She was a relatively petite woman with gray eyes and black hair, worn short with 2 long braids bound in white cloth, each ending in a large golden ring. The 3 lieutenants present looked to their captains for confirmation, before they all took off after Renji. "Captains Kuchiki and Unohana, return to your divisions. And tell them to move out," ordered Yamamoto firmly. "We will capture all the Ryoka here and now." Kuchiki Byakuya, captain of the 6th Division, looked like he was about to say something, but at the last moment, held back, and Flash stepped away, Unohana right behind him. Yamamoto continued, "Captain Sui Feng, you are too," but before he could finish his orders, a black blur slammed into Sui Feng and carried her away. Naruto scowled, recognizing Yoruichi's Raryoku signature, and was sorely tempted to follow, but he knew he still had orders to carry out. With a sigh, he nodded to Yamamoto, and took off to pursue the lieutenants, leaving the commander alone to deal with Kyoraku Shunsui and Yukitake Jashiro. Flash stepping ahead quickly, Naruto arrived just in time to see Ichigo delivering the final knockout blow to the last of the 3 lieutenants who had pursued him, barehanded. He whistled, genuinely impressed. "You've gotten stronger, Ichigo," he commented nonchalantly. "That's good," and smiled fiercely. "You," hollered Ichigo angrily, a deep scowl appearing on his face, "you're that guy from the bridge." Naruto shrugged. "Oh, I am so gonna enjo. Why, kicking both yours and that Byakuya bastard's asses," boasted Ichigo, brimming with a new confidence. "Then I'm taking Rukia back home with us." Naruto's smile turned sly. "Now let's not get ahead of ourselves. You have yet to even hit me." "Oh really?" retorted Ichigo blasé, as he disappeared in a burst of superhuman speed. Naruto remained coolly unfazed as he spun around faster than sight, atching onto Ichigo's outstretched arm by the wrist. "Yes really," Naruto replied deadpan. Ichigo blinked in disbelief. He had thought that Byakuya was fast, but Naruto's speed was right up there with Yoruichi's. Before Ichigo had a chance to recover, Naruto let him go and then drop-kicked him in the chest, sending him a fair distance away, bones creaking. Fortunately for Ichigo, he managed to veer his wits quickly and came rushing straight at Naruto, Zangetsu poised for a devastating horizontal slice at the blonde's midriff. Acting quickly, Naruto formed an open circle with his hands in front of his chest, Bakudo 39. Hikari no Tate, He chanted swiftly. Instantly a circular shield made of hardened light materialized before his chest, stopping Zangetsu's bladed edge dead. "Hey man, the heck is wrong with you?" bellowed Naruto suddenly, with a childish glare. "What are you?" began Ichigo, totally confused, but Naruto cut him off. "You literally just tried to cut me in half," the blonde seethed. Ichigo blinked and looked down. Zangetsu was still being pressed against Naruto's unmoving shield. He flushed red. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Ichigo demanded indignantly. "You're the one that started this fight." "Yeah, well, I'm not trying to cut people in half with a sword, now am I?" replied Naruto cheekily, his false anger dissipating in a flash. Ichigo visible twitched, but was at a complete loss for a decent reply. This unfortunately distracted him enough that he didn't notice what Naruto had secretly been doing until it was too late. The blonde had never really lost his shinobi habit of using any means to win. With a smug grin, Naruto loosed a second Kido at close range. "Hado 58, Tenrin," he said calmly, and thrust his fist into Ichigo's gut. A second later, Ichigo SC. Reaming bloody murder and a lot of dirt was blasted high in the sky by a violent, tornado-shaped blast of wind that burst out of Naruto's outstretched hand. Meanwhile, inside Naruto's head, HMMN, which spell to use now? No, no, yes. He smirked deviously. Kido could be so much fun. Placing one hand in front of his torso, and placing the other palm on the underside, tightly gripping the forearm to reduce recoil. He began gathering up a large amount of Raryoku, while chanting quietly, waiting for Ichigo to become visible again. He was rewarded for his patience with the sight of one very ticked-off human teen. Standing nearly 200 feet up in the air, with a deep scowl on his face. Said scowl quickly turned to a look of panic. One Ichigo could clearly see the pose Naruto was in, the gathering power in his hand. And the seriously demented smile on the blonde's lips. "Hado 64, Jaibushi!" roared Naruto triumphantly, and from his palm a massive wave of lightning bolts erupted with an enormous, thundering roar. "You have got to be kidding me," screamed Ichigo. "Fine, you wanna play that game? Getsu ga Tensho," he bellowed as he swung Zangetsu forward with as much force as he could. From the tip of his cleaver-like oversized Zanpakuto, an icy blue wave of pure Raryoku shot forward, easily cutting right through the mass of oncoming lightning bolts, heading straight for Naruto. "You know, it's times like this that I wish I could still make clones of myself," Naruto thought to himself idly as he watched the crescent-shaped wave of destructive power move closer. Seconds before Ichigo's attack hit, a green bubble of Raryoku shimmered into existence around Naruto, that just barely managed to hold off Ichigo's attack before shattering. After his energy bubble faded away, Naruto faced Ichigo, who was now standing on the ground, noting the living boy was breathing a little heavier. "So it seems you've definitely gotten stronger, Ichigo. I guess I can let you face my Shikai now," said Naruto softly. "Bring it on, I can take anything you throw at me," replied Ichigo confidently. "I hope so," smirked Naruto as he reached for the katana sheathed at his side. Ichigo watched in anticipation as Naruto reached for his sword. Finally, the human thought secretly excited at the challenge. "Hey, it's time to fight," Naruto mentally whispered to the spirit within his Zanpakuto while his hand rested on the hilt, which was all black, and had a gold, rectangular tsuba, or guard, on the top. Swiftly he unsheathed the blade and held it out horizontally in front of himself. It between the dark and the light. "Twilight Heart," Naruto intoned, his tone flat as he ran his left palm along the flat side of the thin katana. For a few seconds his sword was outlined with an almost blinding white light, which quickly faded to a deep black aura. The blade abruptly shattered into hundreds of black and white particles of black and white energy. The black quickly surrounding his right arm, the white enshrouding his left. Less than 10 seconds later, the energy disappeared and Naruto fully revealed his Shikai to his opponent. Covering his arms were what appeared to be the pieces of a set medieval armor. Surrounding his right arm was an ebony-colored, metal triple-layered pauldron, which covered his shoulder, while a bracer, counter, and a vambrace flowed from his shoulder to his forearm. His hand was covered by a studded metal gauntlet with 4 small knuckle spikes. His left arm was clad in an identical armor set, this colored a pure white. A gleaming silver breastplate covered his pectorals and connected the 2 pieces of armor. Naruto looked up to where Ichigo was standing and raised his right arm, palm out. Dark bomb, he murmured without preamble. From the right gauntlet an enormous black orb, almost 4 feet in diameter, rippled into existence, then shot forward at an incredible speed, covering the distance between the two fighters in seconds. Reacting on pure instinct, Ichigo flash stepped to the side, the orb missing him by bare millimeters, and then violently exploding on the rocky plateau 100 yards away. Ichigo shivered involuntarily, even from a distance. He could feel the raw power of the explosion. He focused his attention on Naruto again, who for some odd reason, hadn't moved during the interval, but when Naruto locked eyes, the blonde smiled, and disappeared. Ichigo, despite being unable to see where Naruto had gone, whirled around, anticipating a classic strike from behind. However, he was rewarded for his efforts with devastating punch to the back, sending him flying painfully into the dirt. Naruto smirked at his deception. Everyone always goes for the back, this time it was a feint. What were you looking at, Ichigo? Taunted Naruto, is that all you've got? Screw you, bellowed Ichigo as he hauled himself up off the ground. I'm going to rescue Rukia, and I swear I'll crush anyone who stands in my way. Naruto sighed and Flash stepped forward. Prove it. He commanded as a rod of white energy materialized in his left gauntlet. Light blades, he said, naming his next attack. Ichigo rushed forward then, and swung Zangetsu forward with all his strength. Steel met solidified energy, with a piercing screech. Their blades locked, and unexpectedly, Naruto used his free black gauntlet to slash Ichigo across his chest, leaving 5 bloody lines. Graah! Ichigo screamed in pain, unconsciously moving Zangetsu out of the way, leaving an opening which Naruto happily exploited. Hado 33, Sokatsui, the Kido master intoned. From his right palm a destructive wave of blue fire blazed into existence, blasting a stunned and bleeding Ichigo, who had barely managed to get Zangetsu into a half-assed block, a dozen yards away. When the dust kicked up by his Kido faded away, Naruto was greeted by the sight of Ichigo down on one knee, panting heavily. Man, gasped Ichigo, I guess I shouldn't have tried to take on someone so strong with just my Shikai. Naruto perked his ears up at the teen's remark. What did you say? He demanded. She wouldn't have, he thought. Ichigo smiled, detecting a change in Naruto's tone. I said I can't do this with just my Shikai. I guess that means I'll have to use Bankai. Naruto's eyes narrowed. Go ahead then, Ichigo, show me what you've got, he said coldly. All right then, Ichigo SM. I led briefly as he stood and held Zangetsu front himself parallel to the ground, while building up his Raryoku. Tattered bits of his false Shinigami outfit were ripped away by his own Ryutsu. Bankai, Ichigo intoned somberly. And his brown eyes glowed an unearthly blue. Naruto watched intently as Ichigo's Zangetsu was enveloped in blue-white, Raryoku. Moments later the energy surrounding Ichigo blasted forward in a condensed beam that stretched across nearly the entirety of the Sokyoku Hill. An enormous amount of dust was kicked up by the release of the raw spirit energy, blocking Ichigo from Naruto's view. Impressive, Naruto thought to himself. He has a lot of potential. Putting those thoughts aside, with a pulse of his own Ryutsu he cleared the air and took in the sight of his opponent's Bankai. Ichigo stood in a crater created by his own power, his previous standard Shinigami outfit replaced by a long-sleeved, ankle-length black coat with red lining on the inside, and ragged ends. His oversized Zanpakuto replaced by 3-foot Dato Japanese long sword made from ebony steel, with a cross guard made from 4 prongs bent out to form the shape of the manji. Instead of the cloth wrappings his Shikai form had. A short length of chain with a broken link at the end dangled from the base of the hilt. This is Tensa Zangetsu, Ichigo said quietly, but proudly. My Bankai. Naruto blinked as he took it in. Your Bankai is different from any other I've seen, he said finally after a moment of silence. Why the hell is it so small? He looked at Ichigo's face, with a sly grin. Maybe it means something. Che. Ichigo fired back nonchalantly. Who the hell cares? Then he instantly vanished from Naruto's sight, reappearing less than a second later, the slim Dato poised to take off his opponent's head. This time it was Naruto who had to react instinctively, shielding himself with his left arm, which he barely managed to get up in time. He's gotten faster, he noted. And with a grunt of effort he threw Ichigo's Tensa Zangetsu off his arm. The small beams of black and white energy extended from the fingertips of both gauntlets, and Naruto began his counter-attack. Moving with an almost animalistic fury, he attacked Ichigo relentlessly, clawing, slashing, and punching without pause. Ichigo in turn blocked each strike, his arm and blade moving faster than sound. But to his surprise, his own attacks were always blocked as well. Naruto had great fighting instincts. After nearly 5 minutes melee combat, Naruto finally managed to fully deflect Ichigo's blade away. And wisely used the opening to move away. He could tell that he would not be able to get the physical upper hand. "What's the matter?" taunted Ichigo, much like Naruto had earlier. "Finally realized I'm gonna beat you." "Hardly," muttered Naruto as he laced his hands together. When he pulled apart his hands, a semi-transparent white orb, with a smaller black circle in the center, materialized in front of his torso. "Eat this." Twilight barrage, Naruto suddenly bellowed, hurling the orb high into the sky. At 30 meters the ball exploded violently, and dozens of small black and white energy beams rained down from the sky. Naruto watched impassively, as Ichigo kicked his speed up a notch, moving far faster than normal flash steps, between the beams, leaving over a dozen after images of himself behind until at last bit of the attack faded away. He refused to let his annoyance show. "Too slow," said Ichigo when the attack ended as his after images also faded away. There wasn't even a scratch on him. "Don't get too cocky," said Naruto quietly. 2 more energy orbs appeared, one in each of his palms, Twilight Thorn. Twin jagged black and white rays, reminiscent of lightning bolts erupted from his hands, swirling around each other in a piercing beam attack that was, truth be told, rather beautiful. Ichigo quickly blocked the drill-like energy construct with the flat of his sword, but was surprised by the amount of power behind it. Still holding Tensa Zangetsu firmly, he was slowly being pushed backwards. "Getsu ga Tensho," Ichigo grunted, in an attempt to stave off injury by Naruto's attack. From the tip of Tensa Zangetsu a black wave of energy blasted forward, cutting right through Naruto's attack. Twisting to the side, Naruto barely evaded Ichigo's counter-attack, surprise etched on his face. "That technique is a hell of a lot stronger. I guess his Bankai doesn't only increase his speed." Before he could move forward, Ichigo burst into action, his speed vastly increased, as it had been when he was dodging the Twilight barrage earlier. After images trailed in his wake, and Naruto was forced on the defensive. His years of experience prevented him from serious injury, but he was no longer unscathed. Blood oozed from a myriad of cuts. But Naruto also noticed that Ichigo was slowing down slightly as time passed. Nearly 5 minutes after he had begun the second melee assault, Ichigo had finally slowed down enough for Naruto to block his next attack easily. Quickly knocking his opponent's blade aside, Naruto latched one hand around Ichigo's throat. "Idiot," he said flatly, as he began squeezing. Ichigo tried to raise Zangetsu, but Naruto brutally ripped the sword of his opponent's hand, and threw it to the side. "You're not ready to use your Bankai in real combat." Naruto coldly, as another black orb materialized in his right palm. "You're lucky you're not dead right now anyway." As the world faded to darkness around his eyes, Ichigo kept frantically ordering his body to move. "No. It can't end like this. I have to win, I have to win." Just before the darkness overtook him, Ichigo heard a familiar, dark voice in his head mutter, "Pathetic." He wasn't trying to kill the human. Despite his anger, just deprive him of oxygen, enough to knock him out. Thankfully it seemed like was, eyes closed. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he suddenly sensed Ichigo's Raryoku become darker and heavier. "What the? Idiot, I told you I'd be in trouble if you died," the human spoke, his voice sounded off. Something was seriously wrong, and Naruto's hand slackened. Height Raryoku began to collect and solidify around Ichigo's face, and he began laughing maniacally, his voice becoming distorted further and further while his sclera faded to a deep black and his pupils burned a bright gold. A few seconds later, the malignant Raryoku had formed a partial bone mask, adorned with red stripes over half of the orange-haired boy's face. "No!" screamed Naruto, almost feral, as he observed the transformation. "Him too." Enraged beyond words, Naruto finally let go of the active restraint on his powers. An ungodly torrent of green Raryoku exploded outward from his entire body, completely eclipsing Ichigo's admittedly impressive power. Raryoku flared wildy around Naruto's left arm, as he punched Ichigo directly in the mask, pulverizing it to dust. Ichigo let out a strangled gasp, and dropped like a rock. Naruto watched in satisfaction as Ichigo's eyes changed back to their proper colors, before promptly rolling up inside his head. The small Bankai glowed white before transforming back into the large cleaver, and his robe changed back to the standard, tattered Shinigami garb. Taking a deep breath, Naruto worked on restraining his considerable power, which was a tiring mental exercise. After gently setting the orange-haired teen down, Naruto dispelled his own Shikai, and sheathed the katana. Thanks for the help, he thanked Twilight Heart. It was no trouble, replied his Zanpakuto spirit. Then went silent. She was not much of a talker after all. I guess I should heal him, commented Naruto idly as he looked over Ichigo, noting especially the 5 grams. Ashes on his chest that had resumed bleeding, and the brand new shiner on his left eye. He sighed, and a pink aura surrounded his right hand as he activated one of the healing-type Kido he knew. Moving the spell over the gashes one by one, Naruto healed Ichigo of his wounds until all that remained were 5 thin pale scars covering his chest. Brat better be grateful, he muttered to himself as he sat down next to him. When this is over, I have an old friend to talk to, he spat the word friend almost like a curse. For nearly a half hour Ichigo remained unconscious, until at last his eyes slowly opened. I'm alive, he questioned blearily. Ha! Laughed an annoyingly familiar voice, course you're alive, my orders were always to subdue you, not kill you. Sitting up quickly Ichigo saw Naruto sitting next to him, gazing up into the sky without a care in the world. You know Ichigo, you kinda remind me of myself, commented Naruto suddenly. What do you mean? Scowled Ichigo, his head still swam from sitting up so fast. A great man I knew once told me those who abandon the rules are trash, but those who abandon their friends are less than trash, Naruto replied. I can respect you, because you would come all this way just to rescue a friend. She's not just a friend, said Ichigo quietly, she changed my life, saving her is the least I could do. Naruto just smiled, you're alright kid. He looked off to the east, and tilted his head to the side. Now then, it seems some friends of yours are about to arrive. Ichigo looked to where Naruto's gaze was directed and sure enough saw a group of people moving closer in the distance. Kurosaki-kun, floated a girl's voice. Where are you? Let's go greet them, shall we? Abruptly said Naruto cheerfully. What do you? Began Ichigo. Before he could finish, Naruto hauled him over his shoulder. Hold on tight, he commanded Naruto before flash stepping towards the other mortals. 3 mortal human beings made their way across the rocky plateau as quickly as they could. They were Ichigo's friends, and had chosen to come to Soul Society to help rescue Rukia. There was Inoue Orihime, a teenager of average height, with brown eyes and long, waist-length, burnt orange hair with glinting hairpieces pining it down. She was dressed in a borrowed Shinigami outfit. Beside her jogged Yatsutora Sato, Chad to his friends. A large dark-skinned youth, with pronounced cheekbones and wavy brown hair with bangs hanging over his brown eyes. Muscular and extremely tall, Chad looked to be quite a bit older than his companions, but was in fact a few months younger. He too was dressed in a borrowed Shinigami uniform, but his had the long sleeves torn off. The last of trio kept pace behind the other two, Ishida Ryu. A bespectacled teenager of average height and slender build. His straight, chin-length black hair framed both sides of his face, while his blue eyes were covered by black spectacles. Unlike the other 2 mortals, Ryu wore pure white clothes, adorned with blue stripes in the shape of a cross, and a mantle. Someone's coming, said Ryu quietly as he pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose, coming to a halt. The others nodded and prepared themselves for a possible enemy. Seconds later, a young-looking man with blonde hair materialized directly in front of Inoue, with someone draped over his shoulders. Yo! Greeted the man casually. Oi, Tem, put me down, bellowed the figure he was carrying. The mortals jumped at the familiar voice, while Ichigo pounded his fist against Naruto's back. Kurosaki-kun, is that you? Asked Inoue joyfully as the blonde man set Ichigo down. Inoue, Ishida, Chad, you guys are all right, said Ichigo happily as he embraced his friends. For the most part, replied Ishida. His eyes still trained on the blonde man, and who might you be? He finally asked warily. Uzumaki Naruto, at your service, said the blonde, with a bow and flourish. No. Then I believe you guys have a few more friends to meet up with, right? Shall I find Abarai-san and Kuchiki-san for you? I can sense where they're hiding out right now. Won't the other Shinigami stop you from coming with us? Asked Inoue timidly. Naruto stopped in his tracks and faced the buxom girl, then smiled serenely. Inoue-chan, I am the Kido Corps commander, the only people who can question my authority are the Captain Commander, the Central 46, and the Spirit King himself. Naruto then promptly turned away and began walking down the wooden bridge leading to the shrine. With a shrug to his confused friends, Ichigo shakily stood, and followed the enigmatic man who had beaten him within an inch of, and then saved his life, less than an hour ago, motioning for his friends to come along. Why are you helping us? Ichigo asked as he caught up to Naruto. Really? Naruto sighed and rubbed the back of his head. Truth is, something fishy is happening in Soul Society, and I intend to get to the bottom of it. Ichigo frowned. Then why did you get in my way at all? Naruto burst out laughing. I wanted to fight you, brat, he answered. Sometimes, even I get bored. Ichigo scowled at being called a brat by someone who looked less than 6 years older than himself, but wisely said nothing. Why don't you guys tell me about your side of this story? Naruto asked. So while the group jogged along, they chatted about opponents they had faced in their quest to save Rukia, and how they had managed to find each other. They were halfway back to Saraite when Naruto sensed Rukia's Ryutsu moving away at high speed. He got ready to follow when a firm voice telepathically began speaking in his mind. Attention all captains, lieutenants, acting lieutenants, Immortal Ryoka, this is 4th Division Lieutenant Katetsu Azane. This is an urgent emergency report regarding 3 traitors of Soul Society, Sosuke Aizen, Ichimaru Jin, and Tosen Kanami. The Aizen that was found dead a week ago has been revealed to be a fake, and was part of a plot perpetrated by the real Aizen to conceal the fact that he and his accomplices have murdered the members of the Central 46. Aizen has also attacked and mortally injured both Lieutenant Hinamori Momo and Captain Hitsugaya Toshiro. The 3 traitors are currently headed towards the Sokyoku Hill. All Shinigami please respond immediately. So the real enemy finally reveals himself, Naruto thought. Focusing his attention back to the top of the hill, he detected 5 new Raryoku signatures, one of which belonged to Kuchiki Rukia. Damn it, he cursed. Ichigo, Rukia and Renji are back at the top of the hill, we need to get back up there now. Naruto barked. Ichigo nodded and held up Zangetsu, Bankai, he intoned, and T's time his sword transformed without a wild explosion of Raryoku. A heartbeat later and they vanished from sight. When the 2 appeared back at the top of the hill, probably a minute or 2 later, they discovered a bloodied Renji. His Shikai in pieces, desperately clutching Rukia to his chest, while down on one knee. Naruto instantly recognized the brown-haired Captain Sosuke Aizen, who stood above Renji, sword raised high, ready to decapitate the tattooed warrior. Bakudo 26, Tetsu no Kusari, yelled Naruto as he thrust his right hand forward. A thick iron chain materialized and wrapped around Aizen's sword, mildly surprising the traitorous captain, halting it mid-swing. But Naruto instantly could sense that his spell was not strong enough. Ichigo decided to take this opportunity and rushed forward to attack. Not hearing Naruto's warning yells to fall back, Aizen quickly and easily shattered the iron chains surround his blade with a single swing, turned to face Naruto, and with a smile murmured something softly. Naruto growled as a massive blue rectangular barrier of Raryoku appeared around him, followed by a yellow dome, and then a purple pyramid. Shit, a triple barrier sequence, he cursed softly. He must have anticipated this. Ichigo meanwhile had closed the distance between himself and Aizen, and swung Tensa Zangetsu with all his might. Time seemed to freeze as Aizen locked Ichigo's attack with a single finger. He watched, both stunned and terrified, as his Aizen slowly, inexorably curled his finger down, and tapped the flat side of Tensa Zangetsu once. Blood erupted from a raw fresh wound at Ichigo's waist, delivered by a cut executed too fast for him to even begin HMN, commented Aizen lightly, I meant to sever you completely from the waist down. He released his grip on Ichigo's sword. Too shallow, I guess. Ichigo collapsed with a grunt of pain, unable to hold himself up. In that time Naruto had managed to break through the first of the barriers that Aizen had placed around him. How can these barriers be so strong? He thought to himself. He began working more furiously after watching Ichigo get cut down. It took him a few more seconds before he finished unraveling the yellow dome. But in that time, the captain of 7th Division, Komamura Saijin, dropped out of the sky, but he was unable to help as Komamura was quickly dropped by Aizen's powerful black coffin spell. The third barrier was halfway down when he saw Aizen seize Rukia by the throat, and wooden pillars burst out of the ground. Stunned, he watched as Aizen's hand was turned to wood, and plunged into Rukia's abdomen. With a roar of rage, he loosed a pulse of green Ryutsu, completely shattering the final obstruction, just in time to see Aizen remove a glowing orb from inside Rukia, tossing her aside unceremoniously. Hado 44, Dai Byakurai! Roared Naruto furiously, and from both his hands, a massive beam of pure white electricity erupted, heading straight towards the traitorous trio, shattering the sound barrier. Aizen, Tosen, and Jin each utilized a quick flash step to move away from the incredibly destructive Kido, and suddenly Shinigami began appearing in droves on the hill. From out of the blue, one of them leapt high in the sky, then angled straight down towards Aizen. Sprinkled on the bones of the beast. Sharp tower, red crystal, steel ring. Move and become the wind, stop and become the calm. The sound of warring spears fills the empty castle. The person who Naruto vaguely recognized as his Kuakaku Shiba, recited the chant, as she fell through the air. And she was in position. She finished the spell, screaming the name, Hado 63, Reikoho, and from her hands a beam of yellow-colored electricity, larger than the one Naruto had fired, erupted, blasting a massive crater in the ground. Aizen, who had managed to get away from the spell just in time, placed his hand on the hilt of his sword, but tensed, when someone else's hand landed on the pommel, and a blade pressed against his neck. "Well, aren't you quite a nostalgic face?" he said to Yoruichi, who had her right hand on his Kyoko Suigetsu. "Don't move," she ordered. "Move even one muscle. ... and I'll lop of your head." Finished Sui Feng, who had also soundlessly appeared, her own blade pressed against his stomach. Aizen's fellow traitors and conspirators were similarly apprehended. Silver-haired Ichimaru Jin was caught by 10 Division Lieutenant Matsumoto Rangaku, while the dark-skinned Kanami Tosen, Shiraite's only blind captain, was apprehended by his own lieutenant, one Hisagi Shuhei. "This is it for you, Aizen," said Yoruichi. "What was that?" Aizen asked lightly, completely unruffled by the situation he found himself in. "Don't you understand that you three have nowhere to run?" she replied. And even as she spoke, more and more figures materialized onto the hill surrounding the traitors. Aizen looked at the assembled captains and lieutenants, and smirked. "What's so funny?" demanded Sui Feng harshly. "Oh, I'm sorry, it's just that it's time," replied Aizen cryptically. "You were too late." All of a sudden Yoruichi sensed a malevolent power appear in the air above them. "Sui Feng, get back," she ordered. As she back-flipped away, and her friend obeyed. Seconds later a translucent, yellow-colored rectangular pillar of light crashed into the ground, completely enveloping Aizen. While high in the sky a great black jagged line appeared. After a moment, gigantic ivory hands thrust through the line and tore open a void in the sky. At first all the Shinigami could see was an enormous white masked face. But the rip expanded until 13 gargantuan hollows could be seen. Jillian-class hollows, here. "That's impossible," said Yukitake, who had also appeared with the others. Like many, he too was genuinely afraid of this new development. Before anybody could act to counter this newest threat, 2 more pillars of light crashed into the ground, sealing off both Jin and Tosen. They began being levitated upwards towards the portal. Tetsuziman Iba, the lieutenant of the 7th Division, attempted to move forward but was commanded to stop by Yamamoto. "That light is called negation," the commander explained. "It's a technique used by powerful hollow to help their own kind. It creates a kind untouchable zone. Hat would turn you to dust." This battle was over the second they were enveloped in that light. A bloodied Komamura managed to stand up at that moment. He looked directly at Tosen. "Tosen," he roared. "Get down here, Tosen, where is your justice now? I told you that my eyes can only see the path with the least bloodshed. My path is justice," replied Tosen, his voice mysteriously projected for all to hear. Yukitake Jashiro stepped forward and addressed Aizen. "So you would even join with the hollow? For what reason?" To seek new heights, replied Aizen tonelessly. How low have you fallen? The other captain countered. Your ignorance is excessive, Yukitake, remarked Aizen coldly. There was no one in heaven to begin with. Not you. Not me. Not even God. He removed his glasses and swept back his hair. But the unbearable vacancy of the throne in the sky is over. From now on, I will be sitting on it. A dozen spells crashed against the negation, all fired courtesy of Naruto, but each did nothing to the light it at all. When he, Jin and Tosen stepped onto the palm of one Gillen. And Aizen looked down on them all and spoke once more, farewell Shinigami, and farewell Ichigo, for a human you were pretty interesting. The Jillian holding them drew back its hand. While others quickly closed the rip in the sky. Naruto walked across the Sokyoku Hill plateau silently, his countenance schooled into an emotionless facade. He pointedly ignored frantic cries of the members of the 4th Division members as they attended to the wounded Captain Kamamura. His attention was fully focused on Ichigo, who currently being healed by his friend Orihime. The mortal boy was lying on his back inside a bright orange oval of light, generated from Inoue's hands. Naruto watched intently as the young human girl regenerated Ichigo's critically damaged internal organs. And even healed the scars left on the boy's chest from Naruto's prior healing. I'll have to ask her how she does that, he thought to himself idly, as he waited patiently behind her. Only when the oval had vanished, and Orihime had stepped back, did Naruto speak. Ichigo, he said seriously, his own icy blue eyes boring into the other male's brown ones. I need you to tell me CTLY what Aizen told you when I was trapped inside his barriers. Ichigo visibly flinched before speaking. How had Naruto known? Couldn't we talk about this somewhere more private? He asked quietly, as he gestured to the dozens of Shinigami milling around the top of the hill. Naruto shook his head. I can't let you leave the hill, but I can make sure we have some privacy, he answered. He looked around to see if anyone was observing them, and once he was sure they weren't, he put up a privacy spell. There, Naruto said with false cheer in his voice, the space around us now will completely block all noise from escaping. Nobody can hear us. Ichigo nodded gratefully and sat up slowly. Aizen knew that we, here Ichigo gestured to his friends, were going to arrive in Soul Society from the West Rukongai. He said knew it would be West Rukan, because that was Urahara's original base of power. Naruto's eyes narrowed. Did you say Urahara? He demanded sharply, as in Urahara Kozuki. Yeah, Ichigo replied warily. Sensing that Naruto was upset about something. Old Sandal Hat was the one who got us here in the first place, and he's also why Aizen attacked Rukia. Naruto scowled as this bit of news, explain. He ordered his voice, and expression growing tight with displeasure. Aizen was going on about how Shinigami and Hollow have natural limits they can't break though on their own. So he told me that something had to be done to break those limits, explained Ichigo quickly. He told me that even though he had done his own experiments on making Hollow more similar to Shinigami, he could never get it perfect. But he said that Urahara had created something that could, he continued. The Hogyoku, said Naruto. Ichigo started, surprised that Naruto knew the term. The blonde waved him off, it's not important. Ichigo shrugged continued, he said Urahara had created it, but hid it in what he thought was the perfect place. What do you mean? Asked Naruto, genuinely confused. Where exactly could one hide an abomination like that? Urahara created a fake body what you guys call a Gigai, that when worn long enough would turn a Shinigami back into a normal, powerless human soul, and he hid the Hogyoku inside Rukia's own soul, and gave her the special fake body, hoping that nobody would ever find it, Ichigo finished. And how exactly do you fit into this Ichigo? Asked Naruto sharply. Did Urahara use the Hogyoku on you too before he hid it in Rukia? Is that why you manifested a hollow mask when we fought? No, yelped Ichigo. I just now found out about that thing. No, my transformation was my own fault. He paused for a second, and now I've got a monster inside of me, he finished bitterly. Naruto barked a short, hard laugh. Trust me kid, I know just how you feel. Although curious as to what his companion meant, Ichigo didn't bother ask. Something in the blonde's demeanor showed that he would give him no answers to that question. Naruto stood up. Abruptly and with a snap of his fingers he dispelled the privacy spell. Well, this was fun, Ichi-kun, but I've got places to go, things to do, people to see, he said lightly. Later, Ad vanished into thin air. 1 week later, inside Yamamoto's office. "This is highly irregular," rumbled the captain commander to the room's only other occupant. "I know, sir, but I truly believe that this Karakura town needs to be both inspected and protected." Yamamoto sighed. He had learned to trust the other man's intuition. "Very well, Naruto-san, permission to be temporarily stationed in Karakura town is granted. You will serve as my direct liaison for the duration of your stay, and your second-in-command will assume your duties until you return." Naruto smiled and bowed respectfully. "Thank you, sir, I shall go prepare. I think Ichigo and the others will be leaving soon. I want to be the one to accommodate them." Yamamoto nodded and tapped his cane on the ground, dismissed. When the blonde had left, he let his gaze drift towards the window. "Changes are coming," the ancient Shinigami mused aloud. Naruto smiled as he left Commander's office. "Man, I haven't been to the real world in so long," he thought to himself as he walked back to his own office. Pressing the intercom button on his desk, he proceeded to inform his subordinates that he would be leaving on an extended assignment to the living world, and that his second, a talented man named Karasumi Sora, would be in charge for the duration of the assignment. A few hours later, Ishida and Chad stood next to the Soul Society's only permanent Senkaimon, which was the portal connecting the afterlife to the living realm, waiting for Ichigo and Orihime to arrive. Thankfully they didn't have long to wait, as their other two companions arrived together. "Sorry we're late. We were saying goodbye to some new friends," explained Ichigo. Ishida rolled his eyes and shook his head, while Chad just smiled silently and nodded. How exactly are we supposed to use this to get home?" asked Orihime, as she examined the empty door frame. "With my help, of course," whispered a voice softly in her ear. With a small shriek of surprise, Orihime whirled around, only to see a rather bemused Naruto standing there with a smile on his face. "Sorry, Orihime-chan didn't mean to scare you like that," he lied as he reached down and picked up an object covered in black cloth. "What are you doing here?" demanded Ichigo a bit rudely, his pride still sore from the beating it had taken at the blonde's hands. Naruto smiled and scratched the back of his head with his free hand. "Well, you see, one of the Kido Corp's duties is to oversee the operation of the Senkaimon, and I just felt like seeing you guys off." "So what's inside the box?" asked Ishida calmly, and a lot less rudely than Ichigo. "It's a specially breed of insect, known as hell butterflies. They'll let you move through the gateway freely, so you won't be chased by the cleaner," explained Naruto. "Now then, are you ready to head off?" As he moved to activate the gateway, he heard a voice call out, "Wait." Turning around, he was greeted by the sight of Captain of the 13th Division, Yukitake Jashiro. A bit of a ways off, approaching, waving at them to get their attention. A few moments later, when the white-haired captain had caught up with them, a large smile on his face. "Ichigo-san," he said. As he reached into his pocket, "This is for you." Yukitake withdrew a large wooden badge, with an odd semi-hexagonal skull imprinted on it. "It's a substitute Shinigami seal of approval," Yukitake explained. "When a substitute Shinigami is discovered, they are evaluated as to determine if they will be an asset or hindrance to Soul Society. Those who are deemed an asset are given one of these." He handed the badge over to Ichigo. "It does a lot of things, such as letting your soul leave your body without the need for a soul candy, and will detect the presence of hollows in your city." At the sight of the badge, Naruto's eyes widened. "Wow, I've never seen a real seal of approval before, just pictures in those old textbooks. I wonder where Yukitake-san got one." He shook his head. That was a question for another time, and cleared his throat. "Now then, or is everybody ready?" After seeing the four humans nod their heads in confirmation, he removed the black cloth, reveal in a cage with 4 pure black butterflies fluttering about inside. "Orihime, place your hand right outside the cage's door," he said firmly. Orihime, though hesitant, complied. Naruto opened the cage's door and waited until a single hell butterfly flew out and landed on the back of Orihime's hand. The process was then repeated for each of the boys. After setting the cage down, Naruto carefully drew his sword and stuck it in the empty gateway, then twisted it like a key. The teens watched fascinated as his sword began to glow brighter and brighter, until the light it emitted filled the entire gateway. When the light faded, they could see an old shoji within the frame, that silently slid open, revealing the dark tunnel of the Dongai precipice. he sheathed his sword, and motioned for the others to step forward. Keep the hand with your moth in front of you, he said. That way you'll be able to walk through the Dongai precipice, and exit freely, and not end up 100 feet in the air. He chuckled lightly as the group winced, clearly remembering their disastrous entry. When the last of the mortals had left, Naruto closed the gateway on his end, and smirked. They're gonna be so surprised to see me later, he said to Yukitake in passing, a wide grin on his face, as he walked back to his quarters. Meanwhile, the living world. Urahara Kozuki, the man who had once been the captain of the 12th Division of Saraite, sat on the rooftop of one of the many buildings in Karakura Town, Japan, waiting for the scheduled return of Ichigo and his friends. Positioned a few buildings away were his assistants. The young girl Sumugia Ururu and her friend, Hanakari Jinta, and Kozuki's own oldest and most trusted friend, Tsukubishi Tessai, the former Kido Corps commander. All four of them were patiently waiting for the Senkaimon to materialize where it always did, for them at least, whenever they came back to Karakura Town after their technically illegal trips. So focused were they completely missed the humans' arrival 100 or so feet below, on solid ground. Despite not actually currently having a body, Ichigo smiled as he felt the warm sunlight on his skin. It's good to be home, he said, stretching out his arms while being careful not to harm his butterfly. As he did so, he happened to glance upwards, and caught sight of a green kimono beneath a grayish-green haori. He cupped his hands over his mouth and yelled, "Oi, sandal hat, down here." Startled Urahara looked down, surprise etched on his face. "Kurosaki-kun, how did you get down there?" he called. "Walked through the gate, duh," replied Ichigo sarcastically. He stifled a yelp of surprise, as Urahara dropped down right next to him, with a soft whoosh. "Really?" questioned Urahara. "I'm certain that without a hell butterfly, the Senkaimon always opens up right there," he said as he pointed to an empty spot in the sky. "Yeah, well, we've got our own butterflies," Ichigo responded petulantly, as he held up his left hand. The black hell butterfly calmly resting on it. Urahara raised an eyebrow as he watched the hell butterflies slowly fly back through the Senkaimon, before it closed silently. "Oh, and where did you get one of those?" Kozuki queried casually. "It was Orihime who spoke up this time. Uzumaki-san gave us each one," she said happily. Urahara tensed at the name Orihime had mentioned, but thankfully none of the teens had noticed. Quickly regaining his composure, he turned back to Ichigo. "Kurosaki-san, I'm sure you've probably heard a lot of new things about me from Aizen," he said, his tone serious for once. Ichigo turned his face away. "Yeah," he replied softly. "I did." Urahara swept off his hat, and bowed deeply. "I'm truly very sorry," he said somberly. "Stop that," said Ichigo. "It's not a big deal. It's not like I'm mad at you or anything. Although your methods were questionable, you were only trying to fix your mistake, and keep your creation from being abused," he continued. "So let's just forget about it." Quote. Urahara smiled gently, truly touched by the orange-haired human's words. "All right. Just promise me, one day, you'll apologize to Rukia too. Now let's go home," finished Ichigo as he yawned. "Now let's go home, everyone." The next day, moments after Ichigo had left home in the morning to go to school, a Senkaimon materialized right in front of the Kurosaki clinic. A boy who seemed to be about 17 or so, stepped out of the portal, with a small black butterfly resting on one hand. He was about 5 feet 10, and wore a plain black t-shirt with dark jeans, a pair of black shades resting atop a mass of spiky blonde almost pure yellow hair. He walked around the front of the clinic for a bit, his movements stiff and clumsy, almost like he was used to having longer appendages. After a few minutes the boy's motions became normalized, and he began walking directly towards Karakura High School. At school, Ichigo quietly greeted his rather eccentric friend Keigo, who had rushed forward to hug him. With a swift punch to the face, he mumbled a cursory "morning" to his other friend Mizuhiro, and waved to Ishida, Orihime, and Chad. He dropped into his chair, tuning out the antics of some of the weirder kids in his class, like the openly lesbian Chizuru. "Hey Ichigo, long time no see," a familiar voice addressed him from behind, snapping him back to reality. Looking back, he saw the face of his longtime friend Arasawa Tatsuki staring back at him intently. Tatsuki was a tomboy, through and through, with a very lean frame and short and dark hair, kept spiked out at the sides. They'd known each other from childhood, and had taken karate for years together, but since he'd been thrust into the world of Shinigami, he hadn't spent much time with her. Quote, "I didn't see you at all over the summer break," she said. "I heard you got back from your vacation early, but you were always gone when I stopped by your house. Where did you go?" She paused when she noticed something hanging from Ichigo's belt loop. "And what's with that weird skull badge?" she asked bluntly. "Huh, oh this," Ichigo said as he lifted the seal, "I got this the other." He froze and he realized exactly what Tatsuki has asked about. "Tatsuki, you can see this." "What do you mean?" she demanded. "Of course, I see a." "Good morning class," interrupted a loud voice from the doorway with obvious false cheer. Ichigo quickly turned away. His teacher Ochi-sensei walk in. "Sit down you punks," she yelled when she got to her desk, noticing a few still standing around. Terrified, the remaining students quickly seated themselves. "Now then, today we have a new student joining our class," she declared grandiosely, and right on cue the door banged open once more. A blond boy in a black t-shirt and dark jeans strolled into the font of the class. His sky-blue eyes scanned the class for a moment before settling onto Ichigo. "Uzumaki Naruto here, pleased to meet ya," declared the youth with a wide smile. Ichigo wanted to scream. Meanwhile, outside of the school, barely 20 yards away from Kurosaki Ichigo's classroom window, another blond man, this one looking to be in his early 20s, observed the class with a frown. What was even more peculiar about this man was the fact that he was standing upside down, in midair. Of course he wasn't worried about being seen, he was invisible after all. The man focused a bit of Raryoku to his ears in order to hear what the new arrival was saying, and when the youth declared his name, the man's eyes widened with shock, a pained grimace flashing across his face. "Damn it," the man whispered. "Not him. Not now." With a soft whooshing sound, the strange man disappeared, leaving none aware of his presence at all. After Naruto's introduction, the teacher placed him in Rukia's old seat. Not that anybody except for Ichigo, Chad, Inoue, and Ishida even remembered Rukia. Although startled and frustrated that it was Naruto that had suddenly come to his school, Ichigo wasn't too surprised by his presence. He knew Soul Society would eventually send someone to keep an eye on the town. What was surprising was how fast they had sent him over. They hadn't even given him a day to be alone. While Ochi-sensei began the lecture, Ichigo's attention was focused on more important matters. Remembering that Yukitake had mentioned normal humans would be unable to see his substitute Shinigami badge, he wondered what it could mean if Tatsuki was able to see it at all. Or did she also have powers? He shook his head, sure that the second idea was wrong. "Is it broken already?" he murmured to himself absently, as he turned it over in his hands. Suddenly the badge began flashing, and emitting a piercing shrieking sound, heard only by 5 people in the room. Surprised, Ichigo almost jumped out of his seat. Naruto, who was seated right next to Ichigo, tensed as soon as the badge went off. "Hollow," he thought to himself. Acting quickly, he raised his hand. "Pardon me Ochi-sensei, but suddenly I'm not feeling very well, may I go to the nurse's office?" With a suspicious glance at him, Ochi reluctantly agreed. "Ichigo," she barked, "escort Naruto-kun to the nurse's office." With an understanding look to his fellow Shinigami, Ichigo nodded, and the two exited the classroom quickly. Once in the hallway, Naruto reached into his pocket and removed 2 soul candy pills. Wordlessly they downed the pills, and were summarily ejected from their bodies. Soul candies were interesting creations. Each little pill forces the Ost soul out of the body or Gigai and allows an artificial soul to take control of it, operating in a pre-programmed manner until removed a Shinigami. "Okay, you two, bring our bodies to the school infirmary, and wait for our return," ordered Naruto the artificial souls calmly. With a quick salute the temporary souls departed, leaving the 2 Shinigami alone. Then, closing his eyes, Naruto let his Raryoku flare out in a wide pulse, searching for the hollow with practiced ease. 10 seconds later he opened his eyes. "It's about a mile east of here," he informed Ichigo. "Right," replied the orange-haired teen, "let's go." The 2 Shinigami Flash stepped away, quickly arriving on the scene of the hollow attack within a few minutes. The hollow they came upon was extremely tall, almost 12 feet in height, with a bright red body. And a bone-white mask, similar in appearance to a boar. Upon detecting the Shinigami, it roared loudly, before taking a running jump high into the air. Opening its mouth, the monster began firing dozens of miniature Raryoku beams. As Ichigo used the flat of Zangetsu as a makeshift shield, while Naruto watched ready to step in at a moment's notice. Interesting ability, he noted. Almost idly as he watched. Once gravity finally reclaimed the beast, Ichigo leapt high into the air, twisting around so he was facing the ground, then pushed off of the air with Raryoku, bringing Zangetsu straight through the confused hollow, which disintegrated into hundreds of spirit particles. You know, I could have taken care of this hollow by myself, said Ichigo, as he hefted Zangetsu across his shoulders. There was no reason for you to leave school as well. Naruto shrugged. It's my job to look after you, and Karakura Town, he replied evenly. Besides, I was ditching classes before you were even born, he finished with a smirk. Ichigo laughed. Okay old man, whatever you say. The two Shinigami Flash stepped back to school just before their second class started, and for the rest of the day. Thankfully there were no more interruptions from random hollow attacks. After saying his goodbyes to Ichigo and his friends, Naruto left to find a decent motel to stay in for an extended period of time. After a few hours of searching, he finally found a decent place not too far from the Kurosaki household, with a large amount of space inside. Once he had rented it out for a month, he summoned his stuff from a pocket dimension, and set up the custom video relay station for direct communication between himself and Yamamoto. Once the screen was up and running, Yamamoto began immediately. Uzumaki Naruto, what is the report for today? Nothing too interesting, Commander. I managed to easily join in on Ichigo's classes, without incident or suspicion, and there was only one minor hollow attack, reported Naruto dutifully. Very well then, you are dismissed, replied Yamamoto with a nod, and the screen went blank. Later that night at the Hikurosaki residence, Ichigo was having another argument with the technically illegal artificial soul he owned, Kan. Unlike other artificial souls, Kan was a mod soul. Kan was sentient, and had free will, and personality. And was also capable of using spirit power to fight. When he wasn't inhabiting Ichigo's body, the perverted mod soul typically inhabited a plush teddy bear belonging to Ichigo's younger sister Yuzu. Suddenly his badge began flashing and whistling again. Ichigo groaned. Here we go again, he muttered, as he used the badge to separate his soul from his body. Then he used the badge on the stuffed lion Kan inhabited, and popped the modified soul candy into his physical body's mouth. Take care of my body, Kan, ordered Ichigo as he jumped out the window. At the same time, Naruto's motel room. The sound of the relay station beeping woke Naruto instantly. After stumbling over to the screen, he gazed at the readout, which informed him that at least 10 hollows were going to emerge in various parts of Karakura Town within minutes. Damn it, he swore as he searched for his soul glove. Once he was out of his Gigai, he took off towards the closest hollow he could sense. Back with Ichigo. Ichigo leapt from his window intent on heading right to the closest hollow he could sense, but as soon as he landed on his neighbor's roof, he paused. Something felt wrong. What is this feeling? He wondered before he sensed a new presence appear. Che, whispered a soft voice behind Ichigo, followed immediately by the unmistakable sound of a sword leaving a sheath, quickly bringing Zangetsu to bear as he spun around. Ichigo blocked his assailant's katana, surprised at the strength of the strike and at the force now pressing down on his large blade. Bastard, spat Ichigo as he looked at his attacker in the moonlight. Before him stood a blonde-haired man, dressed smartly in a white button-up shirt, and gray slacks. Who the hell are you? Demanded Ichigo. He looked at the sword still pressing down on Zangetsu. How the hell do you have a Zanpakuto? The man smiled and held his index finger up to his lips. Shish, Kurosaki Ichigo, the stranger said softly. Don't make so much noise. Someone with as much Ryutsu as you shouldn't create commotions, and flare their power so easily. You never know exactly how it will echo throughout the world and affect others. Ichigo's eyes narrowed. What the hell do you mean affect others? He demanded warily. The man frowned in sudden annoyance. Do I really have to spell it out for you? Why do you think some of your friends even have powers in the first place? Ichigo scowled. and with a monumental amount of effort managed to distance himself from the strange man, who, for a moment, seemed distracted by something in the distance. "Who the hell are you?" demanded Ichigo again. The man smiled again as he hefted his Zanpakuto over his shoulder. "Geez, what a pain in the ass, do you really want to know who I am so badly?" He lifted his free hand to his forehead, and white spirit particles began condensing into a terrifyingly familiar shape. "Check it out," said the man as Ichigo's blood ran cold. "Recognize this. A hollow mask," choked out Ichigo. To his shock, the man then lifted the fully formed mask off his face. His sclera were black and pupils were gold, and his voice was now deeply distorted. "That's right. See, I've got a Zanpakuto and a hollow mask, just like you, do you understand?" His assailant questioned. "I am a Shinigami who has trespassed into hollow territory. I am a Vazard, I am your kin, and my name is Hiriko Shinji." Ichigo's eyes narrowed and he grew tense. "Come to our side, Ichigo," Shinji continued, "come with me, and I can teach you to control that hollow you've been hiding and running from." Ichigo, still stunned by the enigmatic man's revelation, was unable to reply, and slowly Shinji's smile faded away as he banished his hollow mask. With Naruto. Naruto quickly dispatched the last hollow he had encountered. With ease. He gratefully noted the Raryoku signature of Ichigo's friends taking care of the hollows in other parts of the city, and breathed a sigh of relief. In his eyes he searched for Ichigo's location, frowning when he felt an abnormal Raryoku signature close to the boy. "This Raryoku, why does it feel familiar?" he wondered, confused. Before LD moved towards the one he was charged to look after, Ichigo's signature started moving while the other one faded away shortly afterwards. Concerned, Naruto opened his eyes, and caught sight of Ichigo's physical body running from a rather large and furry hollow. Catching up quickly, he arrived just in time to see the Ichigo's body stumble and fall, while the hollow lunged forward. Reacting quickly, he mustered up a large amount of Raryoku, before bellowing, "Bakudo 81, Danku." A rectangular, translucent energy barrier shimmered into existence, before the prone form of Ichigo's body, instantly stopping the attacking hollow cold. Naruto sighed in relief, and Flash stepped directly in front of the monster, although it had the perfectly circular hole in its chest, signifying it was indeed a hollow. It had muscular arms that looked human, and its mask was partially opened up, revealing an almost human face. "I have no interest in you, Shinigami," rumbled the odd-looking hollow. "I only want to kill Kurosaki Ichigo." Naruto frowned. "Don't care, you're a hollow and it's my job to purify you," he said coldly. At the man's words the hollow began to laugh. "Surely you don't think I'm just some normal hollow." The creature lifted its hand towards its mask. Watch. Right before Naruto and Ichigo's eyes the strange hollow reached up, and shattered its own mask. Immediately it was engulfed in a blinding white light. "Witness the true form of my power," bellowed the newly transformed hollow once the light had faded. It had grown bigger than many of the buildings it stood next to, and now sported twin bone tusk-like appendages, jutting from its shoulders. "What the hell are you?" yelled Naruto, genuinely surprised and, if he cared to admit it, little afraid of this new development. "I am an Urankar," declared the hollow. Cryptically, "and this," he began as he reached for something behind himself, "is my Zanpakuto." The creature then withdrew a massive sword, easily 4 times taller than Naruto himself. "Impossible. Hollows can't have Zanpakuto, the concept literally makes no sense," thought Naruto, as he looked at the Urankar's weapon. "A Zanpakuto?" questioned the artificial soul in Ichigo's body. "It's freaking huge." "That's right, and the size of a Zanpakuto is proportional to the amount of Raryoku of he who wields it," the Urankar declared confidently. Naruto suddenly smirked at the misinformed creature. "Oh, how wrong you are," he thought snidely. "It's obvious that you can't beat me with your puny little Zanpakuto," the new Urankar sneered. "Never know until you try," Naruto replied with a smirk, as he placed a hand on his own blade. The Urankar growled, and lifted its sword to strike, and that's when Naruto acted. Channeling Raryoku into his legs and feet, he moved faster than the creature could see, and cut through the larger blade with his own, as easily as a hot knife cuts through butter. Flash stepping back to where he had been before, his Zanpakuto already back in its sheath. Naruto addressed the dumbfounded monster. "You seem to be a bit misinformed. Most captain class Shinigami, such as myself, learn to control the size of their Zanpakuto. Otherwise we would have to swing around a blade the size of a skyscraper. You can't judge a person's strength by how big their Zanpakuto is. Raising his hand, he spoke again, "Goodbye Urankar, Hado 63, Reikoho." A massive wave of yellow electric energy burst from Naruto's hand, completely vaporizing the Urankar. After he was sure the creature was gone, he turned to face Ichigo's body. "I believe Ichigo will be expecting you to be home when he returns." Khan nodded, but did not answer, or even more until Naruto had flash stepped away. Earlier, back with Ichigo. For a brief moment, Ichigo considered the man's offer. Frankly, the hollow that was locked inside his very soul terrified him, and this man, Shinji, was offering to help. Then he suddenly felt a large wave of Ryutsu appear, and turning away from Shinji, who had also noticed the power, he began to walk away. "Hey, damn it, where are you going?" demanded the surprised Shinji. "I ain't finished talking to you yet. I'm going to help get rid of some hollows," Ichigo called back, not even bothering to turn around. "I said I ain't done talking yet," yelled Shinji angrily, "you need us." Ichigo stopped, faced the other man again. "Whatever you're going to say, I don't want to hear it," he growled. "I don't care what kind of organization you wizards are, I have no desire to join you at all." Shinji's leveled at him a hard glare. But Ichigo glared right back. "I am a Shinigami," the boy declared. "Not one of you, I won't learn to use its power, I'll bury it." He turned away again, and Flash stepped away. "You're wrong," said Shinji quietly to the air. He sighed as he reached into his pocket, and drew out a green cell phone. "Hello, it's Shinji, is this Lisa's cell phone?" he joked lamely when someone picked up. The person at the other end yelled something Bisa-sen at him. "Sorry, I must have the wrong number," Shinji replied calmly. The person began screaming more, so Shinji held his phone away. When the noise subsided he answered. "It's just a matter of time, let's be patient, alright Hiyori. He'll come around." With Naruto. After his encounter with the Urankar, Naruto immediately returned to his motel room to contact Soul Society. Quickly moving towards the screen, he immediately called to contact the Captain Commander, but to his annoyance he was greeted by the sleepy face of some 12th Division lackey. "This is Uzumaki Naruto, reporting in from the human world," barked Naruto. "Get Yamamoto in here immediately, tell him it's priority 1. The startled lackey hurried out of the room, and returned with Yamamoto nearly 10 minutes later. "Out," ordered the Captain Commander gravely. "Commander Uzumaki, what has happened?" Earlier this night, a swarm of hollows randomly attacked Karakura. Fortunately, Ichigo, his friends and I were able to purify them all, but that is not why I called. It seems that Soul Society faces a new threat, from something called the Urankar, responded Naruto. "I fought a large hollow that not only smashed its own mask to transform, but also had its own Zanpakuto. When it broke its mask, its power increased exponentially." Yamamoto's eyes fully opened at that statement. "Are you sure about all of it?" he demanded. "Yes, Commander, I am," replied Naruto solemnly. "Whatever Aizen's plan is, it's already begun. It seems that you will need to stay in the human realm for a bit longer than we had assumed, and I will be sending additional forces tomorrow," Yamamoto answered. "Understood, I'll begin preparations immediately," finished Naruto somberly. "That's it for today. I will stop here. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you please consider subscribe and make sure to hit that like button, share with your friends, and don't forget to check out author of this story. Details in description.